While people often attribute the renaissance of comic book movies to the likes of DC and Marvel, ranging from successes like Donner's Superman to Burton's Batman to Raimi's Spider-Man to Redacted's X-Men, but it's easy to overlook the low-budget 90s film that skyrocketed to success by bringing a heartfelt, fun, and faithful adaptation of the beloved, dark and gritty indie comic. Spawn! Nah, just kidding. Turtle Power! Turtle Power! Turtle Power! Turtle Power! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles! TMNT sprang from humble beginnings as a parody of grim and gritty Frank Miller-esque comics by two guys who just like drawing turtles, and then hit the big time as a wildly popular animated series and a massive toy line by Playmates. So the next natural conclusion was to take the Turtles to the big screen, because for some reason we've built up a mentality that art isn't valid unless it's a live-action 2-hour theatrically released movie and all other storytelling mediums are somehow inferior. And it doesn't even count unless the movie is live action. You'd think taking the Turtles back to their slightly dark and gritty roots as opposed to the light and colorful world of the animated series would be a huge risk. The target audience for Turtle content became mostly kids watching Saturday morning cartoons. Would getting into the violent and over-the-top storyline of the comics alienate them? Apparently not, because everyone fucking loved this movie. And there's plenty of reasons to. I hadn't seen it in years before doing this video, but I was shocked just how tightly this script adapts several issues of the comics back to back into one cohesive 3-act movie. Even the Raphael solo issue became a handful of scenes at the beginning. They didn't have to include Casey Jones, but thank Christ they did, because he's a really cool character and everything outside of the weird Duke Nukem version of him from the 80s show.
So that's your game, is it? Well, mine's mudslinging.
This guy is starting to get on my nerves.
I think without this movie, a really strange, warped version of that character might have stuck around, or maybe, he would have never caught on to begin with. Being that I'm a massive fan of the 2003 cartoon, I feel like this movie informed a lot of how that show adapted the comics. The voice cast and character designs remind me a lot of this one, too. Even this voice for Raphael sort of became the default instead of the more sarcastic and underplayed version from Rob Paulson.
A Jose Canseco bat? Tell me, you didn't pay money for this.
The only concessions I felt they made in terms of the characters was making April a yellow-wearing news reporter and giving the Turtles their personalities and color schemes from the cartoon. However, these little touches were important for bridging the gap between fans of the cartoon and fans of the comic, and it helps to make the Turtles more distinct and likable characters. Before you get the wrong idea, I don't dislike the 80s cartoon at all. I wore out the VHS tape of several episodes as a kid, just like the rest of you white guys. I just think the way it adapted the characters came dangerously close to, ruining them forever, but then somehow accidentally made them more interesting and transcendent than they ever could have been, because they were all just the red angry one. It's a delicate balance that cartoon struck, and ultimately I'm super thankful that show contributed all the things that it did, even if I prefer a lot of the other versions of the Turtles story. Think of it like the 80s show is a really good seasoning that makes every other TMNT thing better. You want to salt these fries, but you never want to just eat salt by itself.
Speak for yourself. I'm shoveling salt down my throat right now.
One day I'll sit down and finally watch the entirety of that show to give it a fair shake. I feel like sometimes I'm too hard on it because the 2003 show and the Mirage comics rotted my brains too much. Maybe I'm a hack and the 80s Turtles is actually superior. But anyway, movie Turtles managed to strike a really solid middle ground between grimdark schlock and cartoony toy commercials that makes it a really impressive movie. And the Turtles themselves are so perfectly handled in this film. The way they were brought to live action by Jim Henson's Creature Shop with elaborate costumes, animatronics, puppeteering, and pretty intense body acting is so satisfying to see. They never feel like actors trapped in clunky costumes. Their movements are natural and comfortable, and their faces are believable and expressive. Even if there's some blink and you'll miss it nightmare fuel when they open their mouths too wide in some shots, after a while I started to forget these were guys in costumes and just saw, yeah, that's Leonardo. Hey, it's Raphael. The first movie ended up being the last project that Jim Henson personally worked on before his passing, and the team behind this movie were incredibly thankful for his contributions, and they knew they wouldn't have had the same film without him.
I went out to dinner with Jim after that, and we drove past a movie theater, and we actually saw one of the ushers come out, and at a certain point, he had to tell them that they weren't going to get in, and man, we saw the emotion.
But what are a set of heroes without a villain? This movie's take on the Shredder is intimidating, cold, cunning, and badass. Instead of the goofy version of him from the cartoon, they decided to go a more Darth Vader route, and it worked out. Rather than the Foot Ninja being unnamed Shredder loyalists or exploding robots, the Foot Clan are made up of all the city's wayward youth and troubled teens. Shredder has been silently collecting, recruiting, training, and radicalizing at-risk youths to turn them into the ultimate unseen criminal organization. This is played a little tragically, and it often shows that these kids becoming his soldiers aren't all bad people. They're just lost or struggling to find a place for themselves. We see the son of April's boss at the news station, Danny, getting roped into this gang and the sort of manipulative rhetoric that Shredder spews to keep these boys in line.
You are here because the outside world rejects you. This is your family. I am your father.
He may not have a world domination master plan, or a secret doomsday weapon, or a brain in a robot that he hangs out with, or anything crazy like that, but he has an entire generation of New Yorkers under his thumb, and the stakes of this story come from stopping him from corrupting anyone else around the same age as the Turtles. I like that more mature take on the Foot Clan, and it makes them feel more unique as an antagonistic enemy force than your usual stormtroopers or other army-building bad guy units. The other biggest core element of the movie comes from the Turtles facing the really daunting situation of potentially losing Master Splinter, and having to guide themselves without him. It harkens back to that scary feeling when you're a teenager and you realize soon you'll be out on your own without your parents telling you what to do or where to go. At first it can seem enticing to have that much freedom, but it's also taking away a lot of familiarity and comfort that you had when you were younger. The idea of being without their dad is something Splinter tries to prepare them for, and Michelangelo waves it off when asked about it by Donnie later. And once they're confronted with that reality later in the film, Mikey's the one who we see taking it the hardest because he was in denial of that possibility. These touches make the Turtles feel like real teenagers, and that's something I don't think the cartoon or the comic had successfully done by this point. It's a story about putting them on the precipice of adulthood, and their bond as brothers being the only thing that pulls them through all that uncertainty in that time. It's what they have that these other kids in the Foot Clan don't. It's a supportive family keeping them from falling down the wrong path when they have to make their own decisions for the first time. The movie is also carried by its human lead, April O'Neil, played by Judith Hoag. She has a lot of great chemistry and interactions with the Turtles, and she really feels like their friend and like she gets them, and it just makes everything feel a lot more like cozy and fun for the first half. And this version of April also has really good chemistry with Casey, too, which, kinda didn't go anywhere, but, it was supposed to. Sure, the movie has some kick-ass fight scenes because they filmed it in Hong Kong with a few well-trained martial artists donning the suits, and sure, it has some really awesome puppeteering and practical effects that still hold up pretty well, but the biggest strength of this movie was just a really mature and heartfelt script that took the material seriously and treated the Turtles and their world like real people, rather than just silly cartoon characters. And then the movie made a shit-zillion dollars and broke all independent movie records in its time, which only made the cartoon bigger, and then which meant more toys, and then a bunch of video games, and there's so much money. So naturally, they made a sequel where they threw all that out the window. Immediately, things got shaken up with the cast that makes this movie feel more disconnected from the first. The original April O'Neil actress, Judith Hoag, was let go from the first movie. Her theory was because the producers thought she complained too much while filming the first one. The new actress for April really isn't as compelling in the role. Corey Feldman was unavailable at the time to voice Donnie since he was having some personal struggles with addiction. They recast Raphael's voice actor with someone who actually sounds pretty much the same, so I didn't notice until I saw the cast list. And Casey Jones is nowhere to be found for this whole movie. For some reason, we do have a new character in Kino, a martial artist and pizza delivery guy that ends up bumping into the Turtles and April. He's actually played by Ernie Reyes Jr., who was the stunt performer and body actor for Donatello in the first movie. Apparently the crew and producers loved him so much they wanted to give him a human character to play. And I gotta admit, he's pretty charming and cool, so I like him being here, even though it's at the cost of Casey. Goddamn, he kicks ass, look at him go! Otherwise, everything about this movie feels so tacked on to the first one in a way. It begins with Shredder dead and then ends with Shredder dead. Nothing was learned or gained. The Turtles don't really have any character arcs. There's like a vague attempt at one with them wanting to explore the outside world more, and then they get to have a party with some humans at the end, but it's just played as more of a gag than any kind of growth for them.
And remember, go Ninja, go Ninja, go! I made another funny!
This story loosely adapts the storyline from the Turtles lore where the secrets behind the mutagen are revealed. The titular secret of the Ooze is that it's just some industrial runoff chemicals. There's nothing really special about it in any way. They also get rid of almost all of it that still exists by the end of the first act. In the comic, the secret of the Ooze is that it's like fuel for technology from a secret alien race that's stranded on Earth and living among us in disguise for decades and building a trans-dimensional teleporter to bring them back to their own home planet. Now that's a reveal! I wonder why Kevin and Peter dislike this one so much. Maybe it's because they removed the whole story from the story they were adapting?
The second movie was a huge step backwards, and so we kind of ended up in square one with the third movie.
The other big issue is the tone diverting from the first movie's maturity back to the 80s cartoon. Gives you a crazy whiplash when you watch them back to back. What was once dimly lit, dark and grainy is now colorful and warm lighting. Just the change in visuals alone makes this feel a lot less cinematic. The violence has also been dialed back, so the Turtles never draw their weapons except for Donnie, because he's got a stick. It's all gotten a lot more cartoonish and safe. The fight choreography is still really strong, but you can tell they're holding back and it hurts the movie. They're carrying deadly weapons getting surrounded by enemies and they're choosing not to use them. Instead, they're surrounded by safer objects that can functionally work as the same as their weapons, like Mikey hits you with sausages and yo-yos this time. Isn't that fun? Shredder gets his hands on the one last sample of mutagen in the world, and his big ambitions for them are to make two mutants that work for him. Not Bebop and Rocksteady. Apparently Eastman and Laird fucking hate them, so we get Toka and Razar, who are even sillier and even dumber. Smart move, boys.
Mama? Oh, Mama!
We also have another character who helped create the mutagen at TGR... What? TGR... Huh? Who looks exactly like the cartoon version of Baxter Stockman, but isn't him? They gave him the bow tie and everything. Come on, guys, if you want this to be more like the cartoon, then why is it not Baxter, and why is this not Bebop and Rocksteady? You decided to ditch the Mirage stories in favor of the cartoon's contributions, but you didn't take anything from there either? Why is this movie filled with nothing? It wants to be sillier and crazier than the first one, but it doesn't want to go far enough because it doesn't want to bring in the wacky aliens or the comic relief villains. It's just a really droll and bland plot that doesn't commit to anything. It's all halfways. Also, what was the point of changing TCRI? What's the thought process there? Did they just want to be different but couldn't commit to actually making any decisions? TGRI Fridays. This movie just feels really empty and devoid of any creativity or passion. It's not offensively bad or anything. In fact, it's completely watchable, but it's just missing that secret sauce, that ooze, if you will, that makes it feel like an actual story worth being told. The costumes, fight scenes, and voice acting are all really strong, but everything else feels really weak. Even the final confrontation with Super Shredder at the end feels rushed and swept under the rug as quickly as they can. He's too physically strong for them to beat, so he just accidentally kills himself by being a big dumb bruiser and toppling a building onto his head. It's a really convenient, unexciting way to kill off your main villain, considering how intimidating he was in the first movie. Jacob wanted to write a part in here because we were writing this video together. He also drew some pictures for it. I hope you like his pictures. He drew some nice pictures.
Now, as a big fan of the 80s Turtles and the Mirage Turtles, I feel like there's just a few changes that could have been made to make this movie a lot more palatable, especially coming off the first one. Imagine it this way. Replace these guys with these guys. That's it. But seriously, all you really need to do without writing an entirely new story is just keep Casey around, since he fills the exact same role as Keno. He's the human friend of the Turtles who's always looking for a fight. Even Splinter is all like, Chill the fuck out, man. Violence is the last resort. Like, the whole time I was watching the intro of this movie, I was just thinking about how it'd be so much cooler to open with a reintroduction of these characters.
Hey, fellas. Pizza's here.
What is this guy talking about?
We guarantee an ass-kicking in 30 minutes or less. Oh, I'm sorry. Did we get your order wrong? Why don't you, take it up with the managers?
And if you want to keep Kino that bad, you can just have Casey jack the pizza delivery outfit from him, and then have him follow Casey and the Turtles back to April's place.
Alternatively, the sentence, Jim Henson makes Outrams, could have made this worthwhile. TMNT 2's Secret of the Booze is far from a terrible movie, but it's far from perfect. I don't agree with Eastman and Laird in their take that it's like the worst one. I think it has some redeeming qualities, and it wasn't too far from being a decent sequel. But I can see why they, as creators of the Turtles, disliked it so much. There's no story in the story, and it's a movie with an identity problem that can't decide if it wants to embrace the weirdness of the cartoon or stick by the realism of the original film. So it's just really, like, nothing. But that movie still made money despite its problems, so they gotta do a third one! Hollywood's a business, kids. The poster for this movie tells you everything you need to know. They look fucking terrible. And there's a bad time travel gimmick. This movie doesn't even look like a real movie. This feels like a TV movie. All this high-key lighting illuminating just how cheap and bad the characters look now. It's so bright that they really look like rubber. The darker lighting in the original movie helped to hide the imperfections in the costumes. Now it's all so obvious and on full display. And these costumes are much worse. Instead of the Henson Company doing the suits for the Turtles this time, they outsourced it to a company that doesn't have a link on Wikipedia, so you know they were really prolific and professional. Instead of lively and believable marvels of practical effects that still hold up pretty well, the Turtles are now dead-eyed, lifeless, and robotic. Their eyes blink and react so rarely that they just feel like costumes. These voice actors are trying so damn hard to make this work. But the lip flaps look like garbage. There's no real attempt to match the mouths to the words, so they just look like robots chomping at the air while an imaginary voice from off-screen rambles over it.
Pizza. Got that, dude? Pizza. You guys are kids. You should be out, You should be out having fun.
It's also a lot more obvious where the eye holes are, and I can't stop staring at it. It takes me out of the scene. I know his eyes are there. So remember that cool storyline from the comic? No, you don't. I'll tell you about it. Renee, the Time Mistress, steals the scepter that lets you travel through time and goes on the run from an all-powerful cosmic entity named Lord Simultaneous and accidentally takes the Turtles on an adventure through time. And they end up having to steal the Time Scepter back from a horned demon guy named Savanti Romero who lives in a big castle. Now, just imagine that, but like, without all the cool and interesting parts. So they just randomly find this time scepter by itself, and April is sent back to feudal Japan by accident. She literally finds it off screen at a flea market before the movie even starts, and she brings it to their house. Also, the scepter switches you in time periods with someone else, and it switches your clothes too. These guys should all be naked wearing shin and elbow pads. If you're going to establish this stupid rule, then stick to it. Corey Feldman is back as Donnie in this one, but his voice sounds a little bit more gravelly. Ironically, I think the way he sounds in this one might be better as a Leonardo voice.
Whoa! Somebody's activated the scepter! We gotta go now!
Raphael has been recast again, so he's had a different voice in all three movies. And Splinter's voice is different now because his original actor Kevin Clash was with the Jim Henson Company. The newer Splinter voice just isn't the same. He's mostly speaking in whispers, and it doesn't command the same level of respect.
Kenshin, you cannot go without the others. It would be cowardly.
Should have gotten Mako to do it. Casey's back, though. He does nothing really useful the entire movie, but he's still funny, and I missed him.
Hey, Ralph, how'd your brain implant go? Good?
What?
His role in the movie is to just watch over the 5 time-displaced guys that April and the Turtles switch places with via time travel. And it has big Bill and Ted vibes because he's like taking them to the bar and then teaching them how to play hockey. And hey! You got Casey Jones here? And you didn't let him wear the right hockey mask? Jesus. At least in this one, there's a little more going on with the characters than, like, nothing at all. Mikey and Raph start to enjoy being in feudal Japan because people sort of accept their existence there and they're allowed to interact with humans and go out in the daytime. So at the end, they seriously consider just staying there and starting new lives since they're sick of being hidden in the streets of New York.
Sure. Your home's a nice apartment. My home's a sewer.
I've been thinking the same thing, Leo. People appreciate us here.
But there's not really a reason for them to decide to go home. They just do it because Leo and Donnie say they should, and the conflict doesn't really get fleshed out as much as it could have been. For a movie called Turtles in Time, they really don't go to that many time periods. Especially after that kick-ass video game happened, and it's just a little lame. This one's been trashed to death, and for good reason, but I just find there's not much else to say. It's not really watchable, it's super cringy and embarrassing and tedious, and I don't think this movie should have been made. And I guess everyone else agreed because this one did not make mad bank like the first two. I'm sure there's someone who loved this movie when they were like 6. What started as a really honest attempt at adapting the comic devolved into robotically making these movies because they just needed to financially. The passion and love for the material exited pretty much right away, and I can understand why so many TMNT fans were frustrated with this trilogy growing up. It's before my time, yes, but I can still feel that growing disappointment as each installment passed. But thankfully, due to legacy sequels made decades later for no reason, this is not where this Turtles timeline ends, and we actually have a 4th movie! Hey, they got Mako! The TMNT 2007 movie wasn't necessarily marketed as the 4th film in the series, but a lot of little evidence adds up that it is. From subtle things, to overt references to previous entries in the quadrilogy, we can just accept that this is the last one. I really do want to advocate for more animated legacy sequels if they can't do live-action ones. Kind of like those 2 Adam West Batman animated movies since he was too old to put the costume on. Make Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 4 as a cartoon, why not? But I really loved the visual style of this film. The more dark and muted colors put me off as a kid, but today I appreciate just how unique this looked compared to so many other animated movies from the time. The Turtles themselves had these exaggerated proportions that really looked just like they did in the Mirage comics. I'd say the only thing I don't like is their giant square noses. Their eyes are a little too far apart and it just makes their faces unappealing. That's why I don't want any of the toys from this movie, because they're big stupid square noses. Aside from the Turtles themselves, the environments look exactly as I'd expect Eastman and Laird's art style to look in 3D. The human characters aren't half bad either. Except for this one guy's mouth sack. He's voiced by Kevin Smith. The cast has changed again, and I commend this movie for doing something that so rarely happens in theatrically released animated films. They got real voice actors! They didn't stunt cast some bullshit like Cole and Dylan Sprouse as Donnie and Mikey, or get something ridiculous like Master Splinter voiced by Bryan Cranston doing an offensive accent. This is Nolan North as Raph, James Arnold Taylor as Leo, Mikey Kelly as Mikey, and Mitchell Whitfield as Donnie. All these guys are professional VAs doing the voices for the main characters, and not like names you've heard of that were famous for a sitcom or something. Remember when movies used to do that? Robin Williams was right to be weary of Disney. Genie ruined everything accidentally. If you think about it, Robin Williams' Genie is the reason why Mario sounds fucked up now. But the end result is that this movie looks and sounds like professional animation. This cast is so strong, and the celebrity voices that you'd expect, like Chris Evans as Casey, Sarah Michelle Gellar as April, and Patrick Stewart as the villain, they don't detract from the film either. They're all more normal and human characters, so more toned-down vocal performances fit them well enough. While the more lively, expressive performances fit the turtles since they're these larger-in-life, fantastical creatures with big dramatic emotions and scenes. And that's not to say the human voice actors aren't very expressive or anything. They're all great. Chris Evans especially surprised me. Before he was Captain America superstar Chris Evans, I feel like under the right circumstances, in the right time period, and with the right haircut, he could have been a good Casey Jones in live action too. Half the characters he's ever played are already almost that guy. Nolan North and James Arnold Taylor specifically elevate this movie so much with their portrayal of the complicated sibling relationship with Raph and Leo. The strongest components of the movie is Leo's story of leaving home for a year to train in South America, and coming home to find that his absence has left his family in a lost and depressive state. The dramatic core comes from Raphael confronting Leo for leaving, having resented him for it, and also their rivalry stemming from both wanting to be heroes in very different ways. Raphael becomes a vigilante and fights crime at night in sort of a superhero persona he's created for himself to hide from the rest of the family that he's sneaking out against Splinter's orders. When Leo finds out, he confronts Raph for being irresponsible and going out and intentionally looking for trouble. And it leads to the best fucking part of the movie.
Don't do this, Raph. I'm done taking orders.
Then there's also some bullshit about an ancient prophecy and 5 stone warriors and 13 monsters and a 3,000-year-old night, and also Karai is there, and none of that stuff is very interesting or well thought out at all. This feels like one of the most incomplete scripts I've ever seen make it to the screen for a movie. This is 40% of a complete idea. It's like they wrote all the awesome Raph and Leo stuff first and then tried to come up with a whole movie to go around it, but didn't work nearly as hard on any of that stuff. Everything with the family struggling to move on without Leo is really interesting, and then the movie just goes on autopilot with everything else. Major plot elements feel like you could totally remove them and nothing would be different. Karai is there for what I assume is setting up Shredder's return and a planned sequel. Look, it's this concept art, he's on a poster, he would have been there. But not as a quick post-credits thing, she's in the entire movie and the Turtles don't even really acknowledge she exists.
Wow, good news is there's a bunch of foot ninjas getting the snot kicked out of them.
Like, the Foot Clan is back in New York for the first time since the second movie, with an entirely new leader. And the Turtles don't even seem to care. They don't question if she's a friend or an ally. It's really weird. On top of that, 5 stone warriors and 13 monsters is too much shit to keep track of. Well, one of the warriors isn't stone, but his outfit looks so great, may as well be. You can pick one or the other, but adding both of those factions of characters makes for 18 big gray villains that are hard to remember or care about. Like, yeah, great idea. There's been a discussion about big gray villains in recent years, so let's have a movie where there are 18 of these fucking guys. Literally made of stone, as gray as you can get. Like, sometimes I can't tell the difference between the stone knights or the monsters in fight scenes because their designs are so indistinct and hard to quickly scan in combat. The plot is that this guy named something Winters opened a portal to the negative zone or whatever, and it made him immortal, but turned his best pals to stone, and released 13 monsters into the world. Flash forward 3,000 years, and his evil master plan is to undo the curse by capturing the 13 monsters, sending them back home, and allowing him and his stone homies to finally die. What are the downsides of this evil plan? Why is he the villain? The movie forgot to answer these questions, so he's kind of not even the villain, and this movie just has no antagonist, and the conflict doesn't even really involve the Turtles until one of them gets mistaken for one of the 13 monsters. The Turtles just sort of accidentally see all of this take place, and for the majority, they're just totally indifferent to everything. One of the Stone Generals tries to stop Winters and, like, keep them all from dying way too late into the movie, and those guys become antagonists to Winters, but not really to the Turtles. Like, they're not really there for any of this stuff. It's really dramatic and interesting when your main protagonist force are, like, kind of irrelevant to the things happening around them. This movie has a lot of really awesome scenes sprinkled throughout, some great art design and performances, but as a whole it just fits together really confusingly, and it doesn't feel like a cohesive single idea. Just a bunch of random shit that happened all around the same time. Which is weird because it almost doesn't even really feel like a complete mess while you're watching it. Just kind of like the movie fell asleep at the wheel sometimes. TMNT 2007 has its problems, but it's still a massive spike in quality after the Turtles in Time movie. Part of me really just wishes this series of films had a more consistent look, tone, and cast. These voice casts have no consistency, and it gets even worse with the reboot films. Raphael has a different voice in 5 out of 6 movies. They only managed to keep the same one for both of the Michael Bay produced movies, and he didn't even like being there. Overall, I think the Turtles have had a much stronger run in TV animation. Sure, all the shows are really different, but I find all 4 of them super enjoyable and interesting in their own ways, and they all have these super dedicated fandoms. The movies start strong and then peter out really fast before a little heartbeat at the end. They struck hard and fumbled into the night. There was concept art for the sequel to the 2007 animated film that never came to fruition that looked interesting, but it seems there are other plans. The more Michael Bay-style films are a whole other topic to cover, but let's end by looking forward to the new animated movie coming out from Invincible and The Boys producer, Seth Rogen. I'm always open to reinventing the Turtles in new ways, but part of me wishes the original storyline would get a more proper conclusion. It would be a legacy sequel to a legacy sequel if they ever revisited this continuity, so that ship has pretty much sailed, but you never know. Turtles have a way of persisting as a franchise no matter what happens.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Man, I love being a turtle. God, I love being a turtle!
Boy, do I love being a turtle.
Oh, I love being a turtle.
I'd say the TMNT brand is doing as well now as it ever has. Multiple major video games lined up, a new movie that was a smash hit, a brand new TV series on the way, and hey look, they're in Fortnite! But since they've debuted in the inky black and white world of 80s indie comics, they've certainly had high highs and incredibly low lows. Let's take a look at the lowest they got and keep the TMNT brand humble. That's right, we're digging into Next Mutation, an embarrassment to turtle fans everywhere and a permanent mark on the face of an otherwise great franchise. This show is often used as a punching bag by those who even remember it, but I've never seen it myself until now. Join me on this journey as we inject 26 episodes of mutagen-infused cringe directly into our wrinkly rubber muscles. After the popularity of the live-action films receded with each installment of the original trilogy, as did the quality of the movies themselves, the TMNT franchise needed another hit to breathe new life into it. The cartoon was a smash hit, billion-dollar crazy success like no other, so why not attempt another foray into the world of television? The resulting series is a sort of pseudo-continuation of the movies set a little bit later when the Turtles are about to turn 18. Shredder, who is still alive somehow, oops! mentions slicing off Splinter's ear and has the same scar on his face. Plus, there's no connection at all to the robot ninjas or interdimensional brain aliens or the animated series, so I think they were hoping this would come off as the next chapter for the live-action Turtles. TMNT 2007 has its problems, but I'd take that as the part 4 any day over this. When my editor Ben suggested we finally do this review, I realized that I didn't know anything about this show except for the basics, being that it's not very good, Venus is a thing, and Power Rangers crossover. But in all my years as a Turtle fan, I've never heard anyone sit down and genuinely talk in detail about the content of this series, like the characters and the storylines and the production aspects of it. So I want to take a genuine look at what's under Next Mutation's shell as a fan of the series and talk about it seriously as if it was just another one of the movies or something. As seriously as I'm capable. TMNT Next Mutation is about the Turtles when they're slightly older. 17, about to be 18 years old. Oh god. When they're facing new threats after their more traditional foes have already been beaten when they were younger. During the 5-part opening arc of the series, they meet a 5th mutated turtle, who was washed away from them during their origin story, and conveniently also was found by a kindly old martial artist in Chinatown.
When you were exposed to the Ooze, and then floated downstream into Chinatown, where you were lucky enough to be found by Chung-E.
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 She showcases her value as a member of the team by basically one-shotting the Shredder once and for all in the 2nd episode. With him finally out of the way, Shredder is replaced by a new villain, Dragon Lord, who is basically the same as Shredder, but he's a lizard. For being in such a hurry to introduce new villains, they sure do adhere to the exact archetypes of the old ones. Spiky murder man, sniveling scientist guy, tiny little freak man with a funny voice that's the main bad guy's comedic foil. Dragon Lord and his evil minions want to find and eat the turtles to gain some kind of mutant magic combination power-up to rule the world. This did not need to be a 5-part storyline to convey all this information. Like, this is a lot of setup for essentially just, well, here's damn near the same villain that we usually fight, but this time there's a girl here too. 5 parts. Why? The first thing that sticks out to me is the waste of the premise that the turtles are a little bit older and doing new stuff now, because for the most part they don't really act or do anything differently than they did when they were 15. I know it's not that big of an age gap, they're not 30, but like, you could have done something. The only new development is that Mikey runs a pirate radio station out of his car where he tells kids to stay off drugs but also fight the establishment. Oddly enough, I don't feel like any of these voices for the turtles are bad. It's just that they're all miscast for the specific turtle they're playing. Raph's voice would be a better fit for Mikey.
So, like, you're mad at me, right? Yo, dudes, what's the hap?
Mikey's voice would be a better fit for Donatello.
3,000 horsepower, pure, turbocharged, fuel-injected madness.
Donatello's voice would be a better fit for Leonardo.
Yo, Warrior Raph, I say it's green time. Let's save Dr. Queeze together.
Leonardo's voice would be a better fit for Raphael.
I can't concentrate if you're gonna keep blabbing and blowing stuff up!
How'd they screw that up 4 times in a row? Because she grew up in China, Venus has a thick Chinese accent. I wonder if that's something the voice actress herself had. Nope, that's a white Canadian woman. I didn't give Kevin Clash a hard time. I'll give her a pass, but it's still kind of funny. Sound effects, sound effects, sound effects. They never let up on their sound effects.
You wake up, big for their kiss.
While the original 1990 movie did a really solid job of selling the illusion of the mutated humanoid animals with practical effects, this gives you the feeling that you're watching Barney the Dinosaur. The puppeteering and animatronics are... even for a TV budget. Jim Henson's workshop, this is not. Characters' heads look like dead-eyed, slack-jawed rubber helmets with flapping mandibles that never resemble the phonemes of their speech. Sometimes they go completely cross-eyed. Even the characters that are clearly hand puppets don't have proper lip sync. I almost wonder if the dialogue was often changed after the fact from what they recorded on set, because it's so far off.
Your mother ever tell you not to play with sharp objects?
I could expect some dubbing problems from Power Rangers because that was filmed in a different language with a different storyline and they just reused footage in a completely different context. But this was made in English. Venus has the most obvious case of eye holes under her bandana I've ever seen. Well, that was until I saw this shot of Raph on the bike. I get it's a safety thing, but I simply would not have used that shot. Silver's mouth is really stiff, and the makeup on the mad scientist Dr. Queeze is a little hard on the eyes. You can always see where the makeup ends and his real skin begins on his neck, and it kills the illusion that he's this crazy old guy. You can't fool me, that's a young handsome guy under there. The most impressive visual effect in the show is that they somehow chroma keyed all 5 turtles in that one shot in the intro. What color were they standing against to achieve that? That's legitimately impressive to me as another hack that's always using green screen effects in my own cheap-ass show. Okay, all that being said about the costumes, I still think all the costume performers are putting in the work to make the characters look really lively. Everyone moves with so much energy and has such expressive body language. I'd say the best performance in the whole show has to be Scott McNeil, who you may know as the voice of Wolverine, Piccolo, and half the cast of Beast Wars. He plays a low-rent, scraggly Kraven the Hunter type guy named Bone Steel, and he's a definite standout. His voice is so insane-sounding, and he's so animated and wacky, like Jim Carrey Grinch vibes from this character. I could watch this guy for hours. He's pretty much the saving grace of the whole show.
Sharktooth, long dead, but oh so useful. That's what I love about critters.
Okay, I know the chances of this are probably really low, but do any of you in the audience know how I can contact Scott McNeil? Maybe a business email or some social media or a website to send inquiries. He's one of my all-time favorite voice actors, and I'd love to work with him in a video like I did with Yuri Lowenthal, Gary Chalk, and Cal Dodd. Just putting it out there in case. I also like the Yeti crime boss named Silver, and how he and his crew have this colorful Dick Tracy aesthetic. He's even voiced by Gary Chalk. Hit it, Prime!
Subscribe to Xavier for more videos like this one.
Though I do wish Silver was a villain in one of the animated shows instead, because his concept and design are great, but the mask is really expressionless. Imagine him in the art style of the 80s cartoon, or even Rise of the TMNT. And if we're comparing it to the cartoons, I find it really weird how we went from one of the most recognizable intro theme songs of all time to this bad, indistinct aerobics dance mix trash. For most Turtles themes, the lyrics are always about emphasizing the uniqueness of their personalities. The 2003 one was about their moral code as ninjas and their unity as brothers. What does this song say about them? Ninjas. They're fantastic and never panic. Something about fighting until the morning? I guess it says they're brave and dedicated. Even though most episodes start with them trying to avoid helping people or dealing with conflict of any kind if it doesn't directly impact them. For having 26 episodes, you'd think this series could have had more villains, but it's just the 5 main ones. Dragon Lord and his goons, the evil scientist Dr. Queeze working with them, Big Monkey Crime Man, Scott McNeil showing us how it's done, and this hot 1,000-year-old vampire lady that shows up in the last major arc of the show. She's also got her 2 sidekicks, Jubilee the Explorer and Avatar Aang after hitting puberty.
Turtles come in bales, not packs.
Get down from there!
Because the Turtles are often fighting the same villains in the same handful of locations and set pieces, these episodes start to blend together and don't leave much of an impression. The one that stuck out to me as having some potential was that they actually found the Shredder again after Venus blew his mind. He's like a half-crazed homeless man that has no clan anymore because the Foot lost their loyalty for him. Splinter takes pity on him and brings him home with the intention to nurse him back to health, and they get to explore that weird, complicated relationship a little bit. But it ends on a teaser for more storylines that never came to pass, where Shredder regains his full awareness and powers and laughs maniacally into the night. First this, then Batman vs. TMNT? This guy needs to stop trying to do sequel bait. Please don't fail, please don't fail, please don't fail. I also feel like they didn't get the memo about Raphael's personality, because he doesn't really have any angst or anger. He's only sarcastic sometimes. He's just like a second Mikey that's really bad at following directions and is obsessed with his motorcycle. He basically makes his bike his entire personality and talks about it constantly.
Any of you chumps put a scratch on my bike, you're footing the bill.
Nearly every episode has a scene of him getting told to not go outside for the night, but he blows them off and then rides his bike around the city all night shouting like a dumb hick and then crashing it into the episode's main plot. It keeps happening over and over, often with reused footage. At least they managed to keep his sibling rivalry with Leo, even to the point that there's an entire episode dedicated to it. The title of that episode is Like Brothers, even though they're not brothers. Which is it? Commit to something! Jeez! Oh Jesus, the show actually has 2 clip show episodes. And the second one is the series finale? Oof. I'm surprised they even had enough clips to show. Sometimes this show can go multiple episodes without a single identifiable human being, and all the action is just suit and puppet characters. A series like this one almost always has a normal human sidekick character to just be like a relatable, regular person for the audience to latch onto. Okay, Beast Wars made a great case that you don't need that character archetype if the fantastical creatures are written with enough personality and pathos. But this show makes the case that they can be really needed to flesh out a flatly written cast of characters. Having no April or Casey or any regular humans at all for them to hang out with just makes the show feel bizarre and disconnected from reality. Sometimes you need a break from every single character being an anthro-puppet monster in a cave. It's like a violent Fraggle Rock. Except not cool, because that sounds really cool. The best human character is Splinter's friend Andre. He's a blind old man that he plays chess with in the park, who doesn't know Splinter's a mutant because he's only heard his voice. Though he's only in 2 episodes total, I liked him a lot. Hey, wait a minute! I know why I like this character! He's ripped off wholesale from Hudson's buddy Jeffrey Robbins and Gargoyles. It's the exact same character and dynamic. Come on! Alright, let's talk about the light blue bandana wearing elephant in the room. Venus de Milo seems like an innocuous addition to the team at first glance, but would you believe that her entire existence actually drove a wedge between the TMNT co-creators Eastman and Laird for a good long time? Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird were co-workers who became friends, then creative partners working on the original black and white TMNT comic, back in the 80s. Once the comic blew up and then the cartoon and merchandise became million-dollar avenues, they both reacted to the fame and money very differently. Peter Laird was a little bit older, he'd already settled down and had a family, and he was more financially responsible. While Kevin Eastman was younger, excited to get out there and find his next big thing after the Turtles, and he bought a tank, that's real, look it up. But they both initially had an agreement on one steadfast rule. No matter what, do not add a 5th Ninja Turtle.
There had been this suggestion from fans, why don't you add a 5th turtle? But we both always expressed the opinion that we thought it was a stupid idea.
Female or otherwise. Because once you do that, the floodgates are open. It stops being a story about the bond of 4 brothers, and then they become more like Transformers, where there's a core cast that's always there, and then an ever-expanding, infinite, rotating cast of new turtle-themed characters with different gimmicks being shoved in. Once you have 5, why not 6 or 7, or 15? And then it just loses the very basic appeal of these 4 tightly knit, well-rounded characters. But after so many years of the Turtles' success had passed, and both of them were in a very different place in their lives, Kevin Eastman didn't feel as strongly about this rule, nor did he feel as strongly about the franchise as a whole at the time. When the creators of the show pitched to him the idea of a female Ninja Turtle getting added, he signed off on it without Laird's consent because he just didn't think it was that big of a deal. And historically, it wasn't. But Venus de Milo became sort of a symbol of how these two guys had drifted apart over the years. They started talking less, they weren't working as closely together as they used to, and they had different opinions on the future of the brand. And Peter Laird hated this character, like so much you couldn't even joke about it to him. He was sore about it for many years. To kind of finalize their breakup, Eastman sold his shares of the ownership of TMNT to Laird so he could detach himself from Turtles and go strike out on his own to start his own comics company. Laird still had a lot of passion and love for the Turtles, and it led him to being heavily in control during the production of the 2003 TMNT series, which ended up being almost a one-to-one adaptation of the 80s comic with some extra stuff thrown in to keep it interesting. So ultimately, the Turtles franchise wouldn't take too much of a hit because of all this Venus stuff, and it did lead to better things, but it's a shame that Venus as a concept was apparently a big point of contention between two guys who were both really talented and worked so well together in the past. And for having such big waves on the TMNT brand, people don't remember much about her or this show. So what's the deal with her exactly? How does she fit into this team from a story standpoint? Well, not well.
You're a full-fledged mutant hottie.
I think I'm in love. You spare me, and I'll lead you to her. She's quite a trophy. How do I move?
A girl turtle? Oh, thank you. We could make a fortune renting Venus out. I don't have my trunk, so you have to promise not to peek. Unless, of course, you can. Help yourself.
Oh god, was this a Dan Harmon production? Nah, you wouldn't even add the retcon.
So I am not your sister?
No. You and I are just mutant boy and mutant girl. No relation.
I feel like anyone who would seriously sit down and write this dialogue, making all 4 of the Turtles completely unrelated to each other just for the sake of a potential love triangle and romance so it's not incestuous, needs to take a serious look at their life and ask what they're doing. If I could think of one of the main themes of Ninja Turtles above all else, it's brotherhood. Brothers in arms, brothers biologically, brothers in the way they act towards each other, raised together in a family like brothers. It's so baked in. It's like the most important thing, maybe? And stripping that away so Leo can awkwardly try to f*** a female Ninja Turtle in this series aimed at 5-year-olds is just like the most insane and horrible thing ever. What the f*** is it with Leonardo and this borderline incest shit? That's twice now. How much of a gooner brain do you have to be to make a shapely, quote-unquote, sexy Ninja Turtle with mammalian breasts sculpted into her shell? I hate this retcon because it makes everything so weird and it all has this uncomfortable sexual tension now. Why is Leo sitting like that while Donnie polishes his sword for him? Ugh, I hate it!
I'll share my chi pool with you.
You can do whatever you want in your Wattpad fanfiction, but like, keep it out of the official product. That goes to you Batgirl and Batman shippers too, you knuckleheads. So if we were to take this seriously, how do you actually add a 5th Ninja Turtle? Well, they need to have a distinct personality that can mingle well with the others. All 4 of the original guys look the same, do kind of the same thing, but they sure don't act the same. They all have very distinct personalities to distinguish them. But Venus's personality is that she's kind of stoic and takes her training seriously. She's just a secondary Leo a lot of the time. Now, she doesn't have a specific weapon that can be associated with her, so she is more connected to the spiritual and mystical side of martial arts. But Splinter usually fills that role with his meditation and astral projecting and talking about mystical stuff. I really can't think of anything she actually contributes to the group dynamic that isn't already done successfully by another character. Her biggest addition to the comedy is that she doesn't have a perfect grasp of the English language, and the guys have to keep correcting her.
Oh, that's hockey, Venus!
There's one episode where she and Donatello kind of have this rivalry because he's all about logic and science and she's more about vibes and magic. That was kind of something, but it only happens in one episode. It really sucks that she doesn't have a weapon, because instead her gimmick is that she has poorly defined magic powers that can be used in any scenario. She can do anything. And I don't mean that in a she's got a convenient aptitude for flying spaceships way. I mean she can literally warp reality and do anything with her magic. She can shoot lightning from her hands, she can track people's aura, she can see into the past, she can teleport a whole group of people, she can read and destroy your mind, she can sense where a lost candy bar is under the couch cushion from across the room. You'd think having a kind of no-limits mystical Doctor Strange character would make the fight scenes more interesting, but she's mostly fighting hand-to-hand, and like everyone else, it's pretty clunky. Even if they emote well with their bodies in the dialogue scenes, oftentimes compensating for the stiff masks, the actors in the costumes don't seem comfortable fighting in these suits. There's this sense that they can't see what they're doing, the costume is too heavy, and the choreography is kind of an afterthought. They barely use their weapons for obvious reasons, but most of the time it's like light Looney Tunes type stuff while they just shout related puns out loud.
You look tired. Maybe you ought to just sit this one up. Here you go.
The editing is really quick, and this show can give Ed, Edd and Eddy a run for its money with the sound effects. But all of that fails to actually give it any kind of energy and impact. It seems like the sound effects are a crutch for how slow and wonky they are. We went from Hong Kong action cinema style fights to the turtles looking clumsy, heavy, and like they don't have much training. I mean, the costumes were just as bad for the actors to wear in the actual movie itself, but they were able to work around it. The Next Mutation turtles look like they're about to fall on their back and get stuck. That is, until the Power Rangers crossover. It's well documented that this show's turtles teamed up with the Power Rangers, but no one told me it was actually awesome. This episode has an actual plot with stakes and drama, and the fight scenes have real choreography. In this one, the turtles move like they're actually skilled fighters with superhuman abilities. They're jumping like 10 feet in the air, doing actual coordinated moves with each other and with the Power Rangers, and they look like they can see what they're doing. You could tell Power Rangers had a better fight coordinator or a better stunt team or something. Definitely more money to drop on the fight scenes because this is the best the Next Mutation turtles ever looked. Plus, the sets are a little bit more expensive, the lighting is more pleasant to look at, and the photography makes the suits look a little bit more flattering. If Next Mutation was this level of quality 100% of the time, it probably wouldn't have been looked down on so hard by history. You could really tell that Power Rangers was in its prime around this time, and had some budget to show off, at least relative for a live-action TV show for kids. So while it's sad that the only time the Next Mutation Turtles actually looked cool was in someone else's show, they got to be exciting at least once. I wouldn't recommend most or any of Next Mutation because of how low effort and low quality it is, but I'd at least recommend this one episode. And maybe someone out there could just make like a compilation of scenes of Bone Steel, because those are worth watching. Next Mutation isn't a memorable or interesting show. It's full of episodes where it's kind of hard to remember what happens in them. The characters aren't developed in any meaningful way, and the action is severely lacking. It was one of the major factors in causing a divide between the TMNT's co-creators, and it can generally be seen as an embarrassing mark on an otherwise spotless brand. Well, coming out of their shells tour isn't that great either. While this series represents a sort of dark period of growing pains for the juggernaut of a franchise, none of its negative contributions were permanent, thankfully. One day, decades later, Eastman and Laird would reconnect and begin working together again on stories like The Last Ronin, which, I mean, everyone talks about that. And Kevin Eastman would come back to write the now massively successful IDW Ninja Turtles comic that's nearing its 150th issue conclusion storyline. And the concept of a female fifth Ninja Turtle would be used more successfully on a character named Jenica in those very same comics, leading the way for Venus de Milo to make a return in a form where she's actually kind of cool and interesting instead of horribly, horribly embarrassing. I guess the main takeaway from Next Mutation is that everything has its highs and lows. Well, this was the first major low point for the TMNT, and, you know, the third movie. They persevered and got to some major highs after this one that made us forget they even struggled at all. Even when God turns you into a horrible, clumsy, uncoordinated mutant with rubbery skin and lockjaw, there's still a chance that you can hang out with the Power Rangers and look badass for 22 minutes, and then one day be in a funny pickle commercial. I hope that inspires you somehow. The multiverse isn't exactly a new concept for superhero media. Even long before Spider-Wars, there were the many crises of DC or the flashes of Two Worlds. But TMNT Turtles 5 Ever stands as an important chapter in the lineage of dimension-hopping comic book escapades by using the concept to unite two different versions of the same franchise together. This TV movie is far from perfect, but I really admire the ambition of getting a little meta with it before really anyone else did, opening the door for a lot more nostalgia-driven multidimensional missions from many other mans of a spidery nature. Here's Turtles Across the Multiverse. After 7 seasons of bouncing between following the general plots of the Mirage comics, minus some major changes, and just doing their own thing with a very Eastman and Laird vibe, the 2003 Ninja Turtles series was kind of on its last legs. They had done everything you could do with the show by then. They'd beaten their nemesis pretty definitively, they'd been able to alternate universes, time traveled, and did a season in the future. All cartoons jump forward into the future for a little while once they're running out of ideas. Sometimes it works out, though. I love you, Batman Beyond. Back to the Sewer was kind of the last-ditch effort to revitalize the show with this weird Tron kind of direction, while also just following what the new movie at the time was doing. It was clearly time to wrap it up. So what better way than to cap off the show by paying tribute to their roots and showing just how far the Turtles property had come in over 20 years since it had started. Turtles Forever is a multiverse story, which I know we're all tired of those by now, but it was fresh at the time. And they utilized the concept in a way that was really original. I think this is one of, if not the first example of a series using the multiverse as a way to cross over with an earlier iteration of the same brand. Maybe Scooby-Doo? Sure, they did a dimension hop to see, like, here's the Turtles as traditional superheroes, or here's a dark alternate future that was almost like a prototype for The Last Ronin. But this was them meeting the 1987 Turtles that made the series as popular as it is today. The Turtles of yesteryear getting to showcase their similarities and differences with the more contemporary version.
Turtle power! Don't you just love these guys?
Due to a random accident during a mostly unseen 80s turtle adventure, they and their enemies, Shredder and Krang, are accidentally bumped over to an alternate universe where Peter Laird had way more of a say in the production, so Bebop and Rocksteady don't exist because he didn't like them very much. They team up with their more comic-accurate counterparts and find a way home. while Shredder and Krang end up bringing about the return of the 2003 universe Shredder, who is kind of a blend of both of their characters, while also being more intense and intimidating than either of them. 2003 Shredder gets himself a functional body, takes over the 80s Shredder's resources, and uses them in a plan to kill all Ninja Turtles in every universe, so there's no one left to oppose him. Old meets new, and then they meet even older in a battle to save the
Turtleverse is like ginormous!
Oh, hey, that's a catchy name. Obviously, the 80s Turtles weren't terribly concerned with the continuity and storylines in the Mirage comics, so they went for doing their own thing in a way that pretty much defined the Saturday morning cartoon genre in the 80s. Animation that bounced between pretty impressive for the time to cheap as hell, bright and colorful characters with distinct personalities in a world of toyetic designs that all look so damn good on store shelves, and a theme song you just can't get out of your head. Unfortunately, that theme song was too expensive to license for 4Kids animation, so it's not in this movie. And that's where we hit a wall. It's not really the complete triumphant return of the 80s Turtles and all their glory that you'd hope for because of a little bit of cheapness. The 2003 Turtles were produced by Playmates Toys and 4Kids Entertainment, a licensing company that also had a cartoon programming block on the CW in the 90s and 2000s, where you may remember such classics as hilariously localized dubs of anime with heavy arbitrary censorship, cartoons that are obscure these days, but if you saw a clip from them, you'd be like, oh shit, I watched that. The hell was that called? God, it's gonna drive me crazy. What was that show's name? And I think a Viva Pinata cartoon. 4Kids didn't have a contract with the SAG-AFTRA union actors, of which all of the classic Turtles are. All of those actors are also based out of LA, and 4Kids was based in New York, so they would have had to require them to draw up a contract and pay extra money, and forget about it. They used the cheaper non-union voice actors in all their productions, so they got some in-house 4Kids VAs to do the voices. Guys who were already in almost all of the 2003 TMNT series in various roles to begin with. So now, classic Leonardo sounds like Sonic X Knuckles over here, and Shadow the Hedgehog over there. That's for you, Jacob! As much of a bummer as it is that it's not the real deal reprising their roles, this cast does a really solid job of sounding close enough. At no point was I distracted by them sounding wrong. Like, I can obviously tell the difference, but it's close enough that it didn't break the illusion of this being the 80s Turtles. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but I think they all did okay. So the big thing that everyone always talks about this movie is that there's kind of a subtle undercurrent of disrespect for the 1987 series. In fact, this crossover is somewhat infamous for that. There's a clear bias towards the 2003 Turtles as being newer, cooler, more competent, more edgy, and just generally more favored by the creators. Like, I get it. Peter Laird was heavily involved with the 2000s series, and obviously wanted a show that followed the comic more closely than the 80s one did. Him and Kevin Eastman were never huge fans of the big lore and narrative changes that show made to simplify the Turtles for kids. Major characters from the comics never appeared in that series, or if they did, they were way different and usually had a much smaller role. If I was the guy who wrote Mirage Turtles, I'd be biased in favor of the 2003 series too. That's not to say that the new series didn't also make major changes or cut out some big characters as well. But that show was made with Laird's oversight and blessing. It makes some radically different changes, but it's still generally following his stories in the comic as a blueprint and adapting major swaths of it almost word for word, or at least taking huge inspiration from the way it was written. The 80s show, while good, just wasn't. So what do people mean when they say the movie favors the 03 Turtles? Well, the 80s Turtles are written to be more childish, more irresponsible, more nonsensical, less effective at combat, and sometimes even, like, cowardly. They just keep getting beat up, or characters mock their idiosyncrasies, or they just aren't very helpful. They kind of look like punks in this movie, and that just doesn't gel with how they actually were in the 80s cartoon. I mean, they were silly, yes, but they were still brave and competent fighters. Sometimes the dialogue just feels like they're taking potshots at them. Though that's usually from Raph or the villains, so most of it is excusable. Okay, like, I understand that you'd want to showcase the differences between both takes on the characters, but there's a right and wrong way to do it. A lot of the time, they're getting misrepresented. Sometimes there's cool moments where the 80s Turtles go out in public because, as of Season 3 of their own show, the world knows about them and generally accepts them in public spaces. Originally, they'd be doing that hat and trench coat Ben Grimm look so they'd be more conspicuous, but the majority of their show, they actually can go topside and live among the humans in short bursts. So forgetting briefly that they're in a different universe, they hop down to the street level and walk around undisguised and make a huge scene. That's a fun nod. That actually follows up on a little bit of continuity from their show. Then other times you have things like them saying they save April O'Neil once a day and having her act like a ditzy idiot instead of her actual personality. Like, yeah, the 80s show definitely had its own flaws, but that wasn't one of them, so it just feels like an unnecessary criticism the movie makes. It's kind of the same problem a lot of comic book crossovers have. Unless it's neutral ground like a big event comic, a lot of the time the guest character is made to look worse than whoever's title it is. Wolverine can be a loud, incompetent clown in Punisher's book and get completely humiliated by the cool, confident Frank Castle, but Punisher in Wolverine's book is treated like a creepy loser that the badass Wolverine beats down and then accuses him of being a little light in the loafers because it was the 2000s then, that was an insult at the time. It's the 2003 Turtles movie, so they take priority. Joke's on them, though, because despite being my preferred show, that one's basically fallen into total irrelevance and gets hardly any acknowledgement in merchandise compared to the old series. There's a brand new set of action figures based on the 87 Turtles every other week and a mountain of nostalgia-based merchandise. They're always showing up over and over because they're the most visually recognizable version of the brand. The 2003 Turtles just barely got some of their toys remolded and sold in stores again, so hopefully that'll change, but currently they're treated like the 5th most important version of the franchise. I will say, the art in this movie is amazing. This was pioneering multiverse crossover rules way ahead of Spider-Verse, because every universe and its characters have a unique art style, and they stay in that art style when they go somewhere else. So the 03 Turtles are shaded with 3-tone shading to make them look more detailed compared to the 2-tone shading of their counterparts. Maybe initially the 2003 show's line art style wasn't that far removed from the 80s show, but it was simplified over time to have a more angular, sharp-edged look. And they even fixed their weird eyes from Season 7 to create more contrast with the cartoony and friendly faces of the other ones. The animators on Season 7 implemented that since Playmates said they were going to be making toys only of the 2007 movie for the foreseeable future, and the show needed to match that somewhat visually. But Playmates wasn't producing Turtles forever. Only 4Kids was, so the artists decided to go back to the old style, and that works better for the purposes of this movie. Some of these designs still have some of that weird movie synergy baked in that I could honestly do without, though. There goes Splinter in his giant shoulder pads and his goatee, and you gotta put Casey in a red shirt, I guess, because he was wearing a red shirt. Even the backgrounds are really reflective of the proper universe, with the 03 world doing a more simple and flatly shaded background for everything, but the 80s universe having these detailed ones that look more hand-painted. They're all digitally colored, but the 80s style ones look so close to the original thing, so the more detailed characters come from a world with basic backgrounds and vice versa. They're like inversions of each other. It's subtle, but it's a great attention to detail. I reached out to Emilio Lopez on Twitter, and he told me about the process of creating the look of the movie. He ended up doing a lot of additional work on the film beyond his main role as the animated series character and prop color designer. Being the production team was small, and key people such as color supervisor Reginald Butler and series director Roy Burdine were let go or moved to other projects, the film needed additional help to get over the finish line. To help out Lloyd Goldfine, the executive producer and the second director on the film, Emilio did color art retake notes and drawings. He drew the recreation of the classic splash page at the end of the film, and even animated 2 shots for it. Even after the movie ran out of budget, he created the poster and promo art for no additional pay because he really wanted this movie to be the best it could be, since they all knew it was definitely going to be the finale. What a legend! The production team didn't have a complete set of model sheets or backgrounds to work with from the classic series, so Emilio and the team had to recreate a lot of it from scratch based on screenshots. They even colored the line art for the 87 characters with a brownish tint to give the look of the aging film cell animation. All they had on file from the original series' environments were the line arts to the backgrounds, without any colors. To get as authentic as possible, they had fans and collectors send in the original hand-painted backgrounds from the classic series for color references. These were used in the middle of the film when the cast got sent to the 80s world. I went through and tried to find the shots I think were the ones they used as reference, since I've never seen anyone do that before, and Emilio confirmed I actually got the right ones. A lot of love and care was put into recapturing the look of the 87 Turtles world, which is great because it helps to visually differentiate that universe a lot. I find this entire section of the movie so fascinating for the amount of work that went into it. It's a really great blend of new and old animation techniques. Unfortunately, the full cut of this film has become somewhat rare and hard to find. The first DVD release, and even the newest release on the full series box set, both include a truncated version that was cut down to fit in a TV time slot. So there's 8 minutes of footage that for a little while there was lost media. There was a European DVD release eventually with the full version, and since then a fan upscaled that to 1080p. I'm using that version for your benefit because the official releases of this movie are all in 480 and look really, really blurry. Even on the DVD it's not great. I really wish this would get a proper Blu-ray release one of these days, but I wouldn't hold my breath. The annoying thing is that the pacing is way worse than the TV edit, and leaves out a lot of crucial scenes that explain how characters get from point A to B. Like, otherwise, they just kind of show up places out of nowhere. It also helps Karai's character make more sense because her previous appearances in the main show made it seem like she was pretty much done working with the Shredder. Even though she ultimately betrays him at the end of this movie anyway, the extended version kind of makes it make more sense why she immediately shacks up with him again. If you can find it, I suggest watching the director's cut because while it's not substantially longer, the portions of it that were cut make it a better viewing experience. The movie culminates in all 8 of the Turtles seeing reality unraveling at the seams because the Shredder is trying to destroy Earth Prime in this corner of the multiverse. This movie actually operates on about the same logic as Justice League Crisis on Two Earths, where every universe is a spin-off from one original one, and if you blow up that one, it'll kill the entire multiverse. And the Turtles have teamed up with Batman via portals before, so this movie is technically connected to that movie via a few degrees of separation, but this Earth Prime and that Earth Prime don't look that similar. Sorry, this crossover stuff always sends me on a tangent. Earth Prime is the Mirage comics! Drawn in Eastman and Laird's signature black and white gritty art style with really square shapes, and those turtles have the big downward sloped noses. It's awesome. Then our heroes meet the bloodthirsty, revenge-obsessed Issue 1 Turtles. That was them at their most Frank Miller murdery. They all settle down later in the books, but if this is meant to be during Issue 1, then they're all quite appropriately ultra grimdark and serious. Though the 2003 Turtles share a majority of their plots and story beats with these guys, they never had the same nonchalance about stabbing people, so it's fun to see them outclassed by a more lethal version of themselves. Then we have a total of 12 Ninja Turtles united to stop the Shredder, and even get help from Karai, Splinter, and the classic Shredder and Krang. Turns out destroying all of existence wasn't as popular with his villainous peers as he expected, because they like being alive. It has that kind of what would happen if crossover goodness you'd expect, like Utrom technology being fused with Dimension X technology to make the strongest version of his armor and grow like Krang to kaiju size. They also use the 80s universe mutagen rules to turn Hun into another giant weird Ninja Turtle. So they take a goon from that show and make him more like a henchman from that show. Can I still say goon? The special ends with everyone going back to their original universe, but it hangs on the Mirage Turtles for the epilogue instead, as a sort of touching tribute to the legacy they created and the real-life story of how they came together. That stuck with me as a kid for whatever reason, and I still think it's like a perfect ending to this special. In fact, it's like the final shot of the entire 2003 series, and I wouldn't have ended it any other way. The weird thing, though, is that this is far from the last time the 80s Turtles have crossed over with other versions of themselves from more recent shows. The 2012 TMNT show had a very similar crossover that actually recreates a lot of beats from this one. Though I think those same concepts were handled better in Turtles Forever, especially capturing the old art style. This looks too clean and digital, like it was animated in Flash. They also end up in the Mirage Comics world and have to run away from those scary-ass murder turtles, but it's not, like, animated as well, and it's more of like an afterthought. Also, the same rules of everyone's artwork don't apply. Instead, this is running on Jimmy Timmy Power Hour rules, where you adapt to the look of whatever art style you're put in. So it's interesting seeing the 80s Turtles in 3D. And Nickelodeon had the money to actually bring in their original VAs.
And you, Gappy, why do you sound so weird? Me sound weird? Heard yourself lately?
The 2012 show was made with a lot more respect and reverence for the classic series. In a way, it feels more like a modernization of that than any other source material, so it's unsurprising that they actually had multiple crossovers with the OGs. The one thing missing from all of these is that the 80s Turtles never hint that they've done something like this before. I really wish they had just one line like, "Not this again," when seeing their alternate selves, just to acknowledge Turtles Forever as also canon. But then I guess someone behind the scenes wrote it under the assumption that it isn't the same 80s Turtles. It's one of those, another universe that's 12 inches to the left of that other one kind of things. So maybe this is the real 80s cartoon dimension, and the one from Turtles Forever is a slight variant where everyone's voices are partially off. Then the 80s Turtles bump into another group of multiverse schmucks in one of the summertime shorts, and they're going full Scooby-Doo team up and hanging out with the One of Everyone in the new comic series. I know there's an infinite number of worlds that look just like this one, but at some point, I'd like the classic Turtles to just ask why this keeps happening to them so often. Last time, we trudged through the sewers of classic Ninja Turtles movies, which makes it sound like I didn't like them when I phrase it that way, but they were pretty good. But I hate leaving a job half-finished when there's still two left. 2014 and 2016's live-action TMNT films offer a completely different feel and vibe than the originals. And it seems that they're pretty strongly disliked by both Turtles fans and general audiences. I haven't seen them in a while, and it feels like it's time to take a look back at them and see if they're really as bad as everyone says, and if maybe they have some redeeming qualities. Should we give the modern live-action Turtles another chance? Let's find out! I recorded most of the script while I had a throat infection, so sorry if that sounds terrible. With modern Hollywood blockbusters, you can tell pretty much any story you can imagine in live action. But back in the 90s, a series like TMNT had some serious roadblocks that prevented it from being as big and creative as its comic and cartoon counterparts. Its main premise may be fantastical and intentionally a bit ridiculous, but it's just inside the realm of reality that it wouldn't take an impossible special effects budget to make it work on some level at least. You can do a more toned down and realistic take on the Turtles like the 90s movie series. But the comics and cartoons have some wackier material that would make an MCU movie's scope blush. With the advent of modern effects and technology, it seemed like a natural progression to just go bigger, go crazier, go more excessive, and just see how it turns out. In 2014, after a hiatus from the big screen, TMNT once again hit theaters through the scope of a Michael Bay Transformers-esque expensive and explosive film. Did this new approach hit big with Turtles fans and general audiences alike? Not really. But they certainly tried their shot at redemption later. 2014's TMNT, no subtitle, hilarious poster, is a movie that miraculously no one remembers watching. The original quadrilogy had its problems, but was overall decently successful, and each movie had its own fans. Yet Viacom opted for a totally fresh approach that takes the Turtles back to their origin and brings them into the world of the 2010's blockbuster action cinema. The result is a film that felt like an AI-generated sequence of images based on other movies that were expensive and successful at the time, with a cast that just seemed like semi-noteworthy names picked out of a hat. Whoopi Goldberg is here. Except for Will Arnett as Vern, that was actually decent casting. I think he actually really fits that character. I still remember seeing this movie in theaters when I was like 15 and not really vibing with some of the major creative choices. And now today, with added context, a lot of other elements in here are unintentionally pretty funny to me. This movie is a pretty standard Turtles origin, with April stumbling upon the team, they save her and bring her back to the lair to deliver some exposition, and the five of them work together to stop Shredder from doing an evil thing. This time, Shredder is going to use the mutagen that created the Turtles to just make everyone in New York violently ill and die. Why doesn't it turn them into hilarious mutated cartoon animal people? Then he'll have his rich friend, with the same name but Anglofied, sell the cure for big bucks. It's like that story you enjoy, but filtered through a few dozen other more generic and forgettable movies full of explosions, so it could hopefully be the next Transformers. Which it wasn't. Michael Bay did not direct these films. He only produced them. But it's so hard to detach the movie's visual style, sense of humor, and form of direction from him.
Oh, Mikey, was that you?
Pepperoni.
It feels like he directed these movies even if he didn't. It really feels like there was a concerted effort to make this look and feel like a Transformers film. The cinematography has these Dutch angles, panning shots, low-angle shots of explosions, blue lens flares, and golden hour orange lighting. Even the decision to make the turtles like 7 feet tall and have them constantly doing front flips and slow motion moves like Bay's Autobots seems kind of deliberate. And you can't forget filming Megan Fox like an object and giving the comic relief character disgusting comments to say about her.
So guys, if it wasn't already obvious with that girl, dibs.
Oh yeah, welcome to my crib, girl.
My girlfriend's totally the hogo shop.
Got a real nice song, it's all queued up. It's special, girl. For us.
Why is Mikey such a teenage mutant pig here?
Oh, she's so hot I can feel my shell tightening.
Chill, dude, Jesus. Please, God, stop making the turtles attracted to April. It's always the worst shit ever. Please stop. Please end it all.
Oprah, I've been trying to talk her into an interspecies relationships for months now.
Chill, man. And she won't do it.
She can't hold her breath.
No, she can't do it.
The biggest problem is she can't hold her breath long enough, you know?
Well, okay.
The biggest and most dramatic change from all the previous versions of the material was the decision to make Oroku Saki into a white man born in Japan named Eric Sachs. Just that name change alone is so cartoonishly stupid and insulting. Imagine if they cast a white actor as Blue Beetle Jaime Reyes, and his name was just James Ray. I can't believe as late as 2014 they thought this was an okay way to reimagine the character. Alright, get your angry comments out now. Tell me I'm a snowflake for thinking they shouldn't cast a white guy as Oroku Saki. Fuck you. However, due to fan backlash and accusations of whitewashing, they added some clumsy last-minute reshoots and editing ploys to introduce Oroku Saki proper as a separate character and remove all of the scenes of Eric Sachs putting on the Shredder costume so they could hopefully trick you into thinking they're separate characters. But it should be noted that every time they're on screen together, it's in this same dimly lit room in someone's house, with the Shredder actor completely in silhouette. I like to watch this over and spot all the tiny little ways it's really obvious that Sachs was Shredder. Alright, check this out. Every time someone verbally acknowledges that they're separate characters, it's an ADR voiceover added after the fact, playing over footage that they had available. You never see someone on screen say that.
In a few hours, Shredder is going to unleash all that stuff.
You know, sometimes it's just shots of Megan Fox staring off into space with a bored expression on her face. You also see shots of Eric staring at the suit, clearly about to put it on before it cuts. Shredder's voice is pure ADR, and we never see a person inside the costume because there's no footage of someone getting in and out of it that isn't Eric Sachs. Sachs also walks around dressed in a black undershirt that just screams Tony Stark's clothes under the armor. Like, you see it, right? In the final cut of the movie, they awkwardly establish that Shredder is Eric Sachs' father figure and mentor, despite being 10 years younger than him.
Shredder practically raised Sachs in Japan. He's like a father to him. Sachs will do anything for his master.
Wait.
Sachs is just an extremely loyal follower of Shredder that uses his company's influence to serve their shared evil schemes. Sachs also spends a bunch of money buying his sensei a cool robot suit. Shredder's design is very reminiscent of this time period's obsession with adjusting every armored character to look more like an Ironmonger or a Transformer. You know, like Rhino and Silver Samurai. Big silver armored bad guys were all the rage. This actually makes him less intimidating as an opponent to me because it feels like the suit is doing all the heavy lifting in the fight, and the guy wearing it isn't that great of a fighter. Anyone's a badass if they're wearing a bulletproof suit that makes you 7 feet tall and covered in projectile knives. We've had versions of Shredder that are literally just robots, and they look cooler and more intimidating than this. The turtles themselves are a mixed bag. I do honestly like their voices, and aside from Mikey's dialogue being consistently gross in every scene with April, I think their personalities are written properly. This voice for Donatello simultaneously reminds me of 80s, 2012, and Rise's voices for him. The way they chose to film this was even a really cool concept. Having the actors playing the turtles in costumes on set and performing their lines and actions right alongside the human characters, just to have that motion and facial capture data used to animate the turtles over them. Their suits are designed to have the right shape and size of the characters they're playing, and it just makes for a more realistic spacing and blocking with them. April and Vern are definitely looking at the right eye lines and spacing, so you never get the sense that the turtles are just superimposed over that scene and the actors are staring at an empty space. It definitely feels like they're real and they're there. The way they touch and interact with physical objects, including other people, looks really believable. My favorite parts of the fight scenes are when the turtles are fighting what are clearly other real people in suits. That stuff just creates a really cool illusion, and I think it's a great evolution of the body acting and puppeteering of the 90s movie. I'm always bitching about casting screen actors to play animated characters in big live-action Hollywood movies. But in a case like this, a screen actor is perfectly utilized because he's really emoting with his face, sharing a stage, and being in that location as the character. Raphael's voice has that same little reverb from being inside the car as April and Vern, and it really makes me believe he's in the room with them.
You're a talking turtle.
Yeah, I'm a talking turtle. And you're a human nerd. Now that we got that out of the way, hit it.
Never got accused of being a nerd before,
But for whatever reason, later in production, they redubbed all of Leo's lines with Johnny Knoxville. It's not a bad performance, but it's kind of a random decision. Like, you know, why that actor of all the millions?
Johnny Knoxville is going to jump the entire lake. He's amazing.
I was surprised that his voice does sound correct coming out of Leo's mouth, so it wasn't distracting, actually.
Do not say a word about this to anyone. If you do, we will find you.
Man, someone should have taught Steve-O how to voice act so he could have been Mikey.
Yeah, dude.
And then go on to have a career voicing Deadpool so that character can actually sound like he's described to. I don't care much for this script treating the audience like 5-year-olds and having characters stop and then reiterate all the relevant information we just learned out loud like it's Ultimate Spider-Man.
I saw him. I saw them. I saw them. And I've known them since I was a little girl. They were my pets. They were my childhood pets. And they were named after Italian Renaissance painters.
We've talked to death about the designs for the turtles in these movies, but it bears repeating that this was a bit of a misstep. I'm in the minority opinion that I actually think their faces look fine. Leo, Raph, and Donnie in particular are pretty okay. Just something about Mikey's big toothy grin and humanoid lips has a Shrek-like feel to it, and I'm pretty sure his design in particular is the one that inspired the most disappointment and ire from fans. Somehow he looks the most human and the least like a turtle, so it creates a really uncanny valley effect in a way that the others kind of don't. I think they were going for making him most human so he's the most, like, friendly, but it just looks kind of creepy.
I got a secret stash of Orange Crush behind the fridge. Don't tell Raph.
What I'm most irritated by is their height. They're 7 feet tall, at least. It's hard to remember they're teenagers when they're 3 heads taller than a grown adult in every scene. And these giant, bulky, muscular designs don't exactly shout stealthy for doing ninja things. They all have super strength and make such a massive thud with every footstep. Raphael is introduced by picking up a giant shipping container and swinging it like a baseball bat to knock out like 4 guys. Imagine seeing the Hulk try to sneak around on his tiptoes or climb on ceiling rafters to avoid detection, then pull out a tiny sword. Actually, every object they hold needs to be fucking massive. How big are Leo's swords if like a normal-sized person picked them up? The scaling is so weird. Pizza Hut doesn't have a pizza that's that big. And I think the look of each character is really blunt and simplistic and stupid with what it's trying to say, while also being very visually busy and complicated. Donatello is a nerd, so we gotta give him cartoonish taped up glasses and strap a million gadgets to him, like the AVGN accessories video, so you're always being beaten over the head with his personality. Raphael doesn't need to have sunglasses on at all times. He looks like fully upgraded Knuckles covered in bullshit. It's just too many accessories. There's this weird live-action design philosophy that more details equals more realistic, as if something looking simple makes it look more fake. This is why the Transformers are visually complicated walking junkyards with a billion moving parts, and superhero costumes are covered in textures, panels, and layers. Man, I'll take a G1 Optimus over that bullshit any day. April O'Neil now has an Amazing Spider-Man movie-esque backstory. where her father was a scientist involved with a secret project to test the mutagen on a lab rat and 4 turtles. I often hear people claim that she named them in this version, but I always interpret it more that her dad did because of the name of the project being Renaissance. I think she was just calling them that because he did. Oh wait, in the second movie she says she named them.
Excuse me, I named them.
So, I don't know. Nonetheless, she's secretly and conveniently the reason they were let loose into the sewers of New York, while Eric Sachs destroyed the lab and killed her father. I find it really forced and annoying that of all the millions of New Yorkers to bump into, this nosy journalist that would naturally be looking into something like this as a potential story is also the exact person who basically witnessed their entire origin story over a decade ago. Sometimes things are just random. April can just be a random reporter who meets the turtles and is their friend, and that's it. That movie worked. Look, you can interpret the origin in a lot of various ways. Maybe Splinter was once a human ninja master named Hamato Yoshi. Maybe he learned ninjutsu because he was a normal rat that was Hamato Yoshi's pet that inadvertently absorbed years and years worth of training by just watching Yoshi from his cage. Maybe Splinter and the Turtles are the reincarnated souls of a ninja from feudal Japan and his 4 sons that were killed by Shredder several hundred years ago. Whatever. The story is supposed to be a little bit dumb. That's the goal. But all of these have one commonality. They give a good reason why Splinter knows how to be a ninja and teach it to the boys. Having him just find a book about ninjutsu in a storm drain is the goddamn worst version of his origin that's ever been told. What book was that? The Atlas Method? Shit, let me read so I can also defeat the Shredder in hand-to-hand combat. Just gotta read the book. Him and Shredder having no connection to one another whatsoever also makes for those characters interacting in very hollow ways. There's all this ninja battle trash talk, and I just can't help but feel like Shredder wouldn't even have the respect for this gross giant rat monster to, even try talking to him. If there's some kind of shared history, like they once knew each other as humans, or at the very least the rat permanently disfigured him, there's some reason for banter. Here it's just like Shredder is being sent in to fight this crazy sewer rat monster, and I don't buy that he'd have anything to say about that.
Very good, rat.
He just treated it as a job. For some reason in this universe, New York is a 20-minute drive from Alaska and completely frozen wilderness for hundreds of miles. The third act of this movie is where it feels like they really started plugging in just key terms in the script to auto-generate an explosive climactic action sequence, and it just turns into boring CGI sludge. After all the cool fight scenes of the turtles interacting with real objects and humans in a way that looked believable, the last few minutes of this are just CGI characters on a CGI set, fighting with purely animated and simulated physics and the camera moving in ways a real camera couldn't possibly move. It sort of takes me out of the movie being a live-action film when the whole sequence looks like a PS3 cutscene and some shots just really don't sell visually. I think they could have dialed this back and included April, Vern, and more foot soldiers to at least have some tangible, real-life elements on screen during the action. I think those clumsy reshoots to get rid of Sax as the main villain kept them from being present, though. Instead of being the Shredder, he's just some dude that gets punched by Will Arnett in a little lab. He's not coming back for the sequel. Overall, it's not totally miserable to watch, but I hate so much of what they did here because it goes against what makes the Turtles appealing. Pulling them away from being stealthy and lean and turning them into hulking, super strong bruisers that deflect bullets seems like a choice made by someone who just saw Avengers and really wanted money.
Money!
The action ranges from exciting and serviceable to boring and overstimulating visual noise, and the movie's breakneck pace has no time to ever stop and treat anyone like a real character. Everyone's just a collection of one-liners and fast editing and whip pans and explosions and Dutch angles. No one's like an interesting person. Megan Fox as the lead didn't work well either because her version of April is just so empty. The whole movie is just shots of her with a blank expression just reacting to other characters saying things. You can never tell what's different about her emotional state in any particular one of them because it's always the same dull face. She seems so bored here, and I can't blame her because her character really isn't anything. She has no arc, she's not really developed in any substantial way, and she becomes largely irrelevant once the title characters start to take center stage. This wouldn't really improve at all going into the sequel, where she's not the main character anymore. She has less going on under the shell than in the last one, but that's actually okay. She's in the sequel just the right amount. This is an appropriate amount of April O'Neil. She's got about as much going on as she ever did in the animated series now. And she wouldn't be the only one. TMNT Out of the Shadows completely ruined the search engine optimization for that video game, making it impossible to Google ever again. This one is the anti-Secret of the Ooze, where the first film in each respective series was going for a more grounded and gritty approach, and the sequel pulls a lot from the 80s cartoon. It was the Secret of the Ooze's detriment because they took the cartoon's tone, but none of the actual cool stuff associated with the IP, like giant alien brain monsters and robots, and universe-hopping death machines, and a pig with sunglasses. It was a really small-scale movie that just felt like cheesy bullshit. Out of the Shadows learns from this by pulling tonal cues from the cartoon alongside the crazy, wacky, awesome Ninja Turtles crap you want to see. It sort of helps to justify their massive, unstealthy character designs if they can also be a little bit more silly and action-oriented. The 2014 film has the Foot Clan as just guys with guns and black masks. In this one, they're ninjas with modern-day technology. They're actually acrobatic and doing high-stakes missions instead of, like, taking hostages with firearms and holding them for ransom or something. Alongside the improvements made to the Foot, the Turtles themselves have also seen a bit of a glow-up. They're no longer hitting people with shipping containers or unrealistically nabbing people from the shadows like the Dark Knight. Here, they're shooting manhole covers out of a giant green garbage truck with animatronic remote-controlled nunchuck arms, and falling out of planes with green parachutes and a rocket skateboard. Even their designs are less cluttered this time, and Donnie seems noticeably thinner. It feels like this one knew what it was going for more, and was made by someone who actually gives a damn about the franchise instead of an algorithm mashing together blockbuster movie tropes. Although both of these still feel a lot like they were just trying to bite off a previously released Marvel movie. Yeah, they saw Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, they saw The Avengers. Weirdly, these TMNT movies seem out of date and trying to copy both of these. The weakest parts of this movie are pretty much everything that's not a mutated animal. They didn't have to include Casey Jones, and they really shouldn't have because he's a really cool character in everything outside of this, and I'd much rather be watching the version of him from the 80s show. He's fucking terrible in this! Cop Casey, ew!
That's Officer Jones, and I'm gonna be a detective someday.
Yuck. Even wearing his hockey mask, he just looks wrong. I know it was redesigned to be like an actual hockey mask that someone in real life could wear, but it just looks too big for his head and he doesn't seem intimidating wearing it at all. He never even gets injured while wearing it to begin with, so it could have just been cosmetic anyway. And he only wears the fucking thing for one scene. Great. Stephen Amell is also a really poor fit for that character. He's not like a lovable, dumb, tough guy like Casey. He doesn't have big himbo energy. I have this feeling he's not taking the movie he's in seriously, so he's always smiling while delivering lines where he shouldn't be. Pick up your bow and arrow and get the fuck out of here. You don't belong here. This movie could have gone from like a 5 to an 8 if you just cut him out entirely. He's the worst in every scene he's in. Kino could mop the floor with this asshole, and I'd cheer for him like he was an MCU cameo.
I clapped when I saw it.
Shredder has been recast with a much younger actor, Brian T., for more of an 80s cartoon Shredder feel. His cybernetic CGI garbage suit has been replaced with a bland-looking, colorless CW costume. I think the way the Shredder was handled in this movie is also pretty embarrassing. He never shares a single scene with the Turtles. He never fights them or even talks to them. In fact, he never talks to or interacts with any of the protagonists at all after the car chase sequence. He's just standing around the whole movie doing whatever dumb bullshit Krang asked him to earlier without a second thought. And then in the one scene where he's about to fight, he gets frozen and locked away for sequel bait. That never worked out. I have no idea why he's even in this movie if he was going to be so unimportant. I actually really like Brian T, too. I think he could have kicked ass as this character. Did you ever see him in that Mortal Kombat Legacy show as an evil version of Liu Kang? That was cool. He wears his helmet for like one scene in this whole movie, and the helmet covers way too much of his face. So let me get this straight. Shredder's voice comes out of this helmet crystal clear as day when he speaks.
No one will ever know who you are.
But Casey's mask with the 3 holes in front of his mouth is muffling his voice.
What's your name?
Casey Jones.
What's that?
Casey Jones? Oh.
Casey Jones.
What the fuck? I know this is a nitpick, but come on, man. Sound design is important. Don't half-ass that. It's hard to be immersed in a movie when there isn't consistency with those things. It makes the world feel artificial. Krang is here for a solid 45 seconds of screen time, and everything about his inclusion feels really rushed and underdeveloped. His alliance with Shredder happens so fast it's mind-boggling. The scene where they meet and he explains his plan is one of the most insane I've ever seen put to film. It's so fast and just bombards you with information. And he just says like 80 paragraphs of shit in like 10 seconds, and I can't keep up with it at all. And then Shredder's like, yeah, I'm down. That is the most out-of-breath exposition dump ever delivered, and having it dropped by a massive CGI brain monster in a robot in a spaceship after how toned down the first movie was is just crazy when you watch these back-to-back.
I'm interested. I will help you take down planet Earth.
Holy shit. Krang is also really only here to have a giant blue laser shoot up into a portal in the sky and drop in flying mechanical shit to look like the Avengers. The Technodrome is already pretty much a Death Star, but having it float and be completely gray is a step too far. It should have rolled in on the ground through a big triangle portal that opened on the street. This final sequence is even worse CGI sludge than the first one because they're fighting another big gray villain in a big gray room with a big gray sky, and nothing looks real or like it has any color. This fight sequence really just looks like a washed out 2010 video game. There's just so much here that doesn't work, but this movie has pretty long stretches of runtime that I do love. The screen just lights up with joy and excitement when the turtles themselves are on screen and interacting with each other. They're fun and energetic, their humor is more appropriate for their characters, they have more depth to their personalities this time around. Watching them is such a delight, and their fight with Bebop and Rocksteady midway through is the highlight of the film. For whatever reason, this is the scene where the VFX are at their strongest and the fight choreography is really exciting. But for the rest of the movie, it's shit like Casey Jones and the Foot Clan fighting, and it has a billion cuts because no one on set knew how to make a good action scene without help from a team of animators. Jesus Christ, watching this makes me want to throw up. It's so bombastic and shaky and stupid. Whenever the turtles aren't on screen, all other characters should be asking, where are the turtles? Because there's no movie without these guys. It's a good thing that the most interesting characters are the ones in the title, but it feels like such a drag whenever a human being has to do or say something, and you just want them to get off screen as fast as possible. Bebop and Rocksteady are awesome in this.
My man!
I think it's funny how they show up whenever Kevin and Peter don't have a say in the script. Peter Laird was pretty active with that 2003 cartoon, and they never even looked at a rhino. Having them feel so pulled directly from the animated show was really fun, and gave this movie a little bit more life and excitement than the first one did. I don't think they really need to be like 10 feet tall and throw cars, though. That's a bit excessive. Johnny Knoxville did not return to reprise his role as Leonardo, but the body actor and now the new voice, Pete Plozek, sounds really similar. It's pretty much the same voice but younger sounding, so it's actually better, I think.
Okay, what I want to know is, if a portal's gonna open up, what's coming through from the other side?
The big emotional conflict in this one is that the turtles are once again feeling stifled by having to constantly hide themselves and never interact with people or go outside in the daytime. Around the midpoint of the film, Donnie discovers he can use the TCRI mutagen ooze to potentially mutate them into humans so that they can have normal lives. And it causes a rift in the group because Leo thinks it's a bad idea, while Raph and Mikey want to give it a shot. I feel like there was some much earlier draft of the script where this conflict was more fleshed out and had one or all of them actually go through with the transformation. But in the final edit, they sort of get over it and abandon the thought for no real reason after a lot of arguing, and they don't have a scene of like coming together and finally getting on the same page. First, Raph and Leo are mad at each other, which mostly stems from Leo being a poor leader in this movie. Then randomly, after a fight with Bebop and Rocksteady, they all start fighting each other over like nothing. And then it comes time to finally decide what's done with the mutagen, and Leo's like, alright guys, whatever you want, and Raph decides they should just drop it. It feels like there's a scene missing. It's all swept away a little too easily. But it was at least a halfway interesting idea that no other Turtles media has really touched on before. Same goes with Leo being a poor leader, which isn't really explored often, but is also kind of half-baked. Raphael almost feels like he could have been better at it in this version, since he's actually the one who tries to confront Leo to talk out the problem, and then Leo shuts him out after justifying wanting to lie to his brothers. He's kind of being an asshole for half of this movie, and you can't really get on his side.
And what about Mikey? He don't get a vote? There's only one vote that counts in this family. Mine.
Oh, and Baxter Stockman is in this movie. He doesn't really do much. I'm just glad he's here, though, and I like his bow tie. We needed something to balance out stupid fucking Casey! Does Eric Sachs not even get mentioned in this movie? What the hell? Maybe these turtles are also connected to a Batman universe and the Joker shot him between movies or something. I don't know. He's gone. Out of the Shadows is like a really messy, shitty movie, but there's some really good stuff in there that I wanted to see more of. You can feel that there was some passion somewhere behind the 30 faceless studio executives trying to make it in every Marvel movie that released in the previous 5 years. That first one felt like scenarios and visuals you've seen a million times before crammed into a soulless movie written by 3 people solely to capitalize on an IP. This one makes use of the source material in a way that can deliver some uniquely Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles paraphernalia in a way that nothing else released theatrically in 2016 could have. These companies that own all the characters we love can sometimes be really out of touch and ignorant of what they hold. They'll try to shape and mold what they have into something it isn't, purely based on whatever is a current trend, while forgetting that people are going to see it anyway based off the property. If I wanted to see a movie that felt more like a Batman or Spider-Man movie, I would have just gone to see one of those. But I came for Turtles, damn it. I like Turtles. And I'm glad they realized that this time, but it was too little too late. If this was the first one in this trilogy, there may have actually been a trilogy. The first movie was just barely successful enough to warrant a second one, but so mind-numbingly awful that it scared everyone away from seeing that sequel. Public opinion on this outing is so overwhelmingly bad, even almost a decade later, so this series will probably never see a secret legacy film like that first one. Looking forward, it seems like TMNT will be in some capable hands for their next theatrical endeavor. Seth Rogen has proved himself a few times as a reliable, seemingly hands-on producer over at Amazon with Invincible and The Boys. Rogen is the perfect age to have grown up with these characters, and with rumors of the Turtles being more of an amalgamation of everything we've seen before personality-wise, sounds like there will be a lot of love for the franchise behind that project. Turtles hit highs and lows. It's a series that rises and sets. It has 2 not-so-awesome movies in a row, and then a pretty good animated one. So let the cycle continue!
What are those?
Teenagers. Mutants.
Ninjas.
Turtles.
Just think about your retirement.
Hot off the trail of rewatching the previous 2 Ninja Turtle series, I've been itching for more of these characters since it seems like it's incredibly rare for them to have a bad adaptation. I remember hearing about this animated movie a year ago and thinking just from the clips of Batman saying the Toby meme alone that it would be kind of, kid-friendly and toned down.
It's pizza time.
I mean, he's wearing the blue costume and is voiced by Troy Baker, which just made me think of the Lego Batman stuff or Batman Unlimited. The Turtles themselves haven't been particularly dark or gritty since the 80s cartoon reinvented them from their vengeance-obsessed, self-serious original takes. And I was fine with that, because kids should be able to enjoy these characters just as much as I can as a depressed adult that's desperately clinging to the last vestiges of childhood hope I have as the world repeatedly denies me the only thing I want in life. But then I sat down with a few friends recently and we threw this on expecting a laugh, and then suddenly... Whoa, shit! Jeez, that was a little unexpected, but yeah, that's probably as hard as they'll go. It's only a PG-13 movie, it's not like... Whoa, okay, this movie's a bit out there, and I absolutely dig it. I was caught off guard by just how much I liked this movie. Considering all the other DC AMU movies tend to feel a bit dry and boring to me. Particularly all the Damian Wayne pushing that goes on, or the way everything is kinda like New 52, but worser. God, they ruined Court of Owls so bad. Hey guys, can we, decide which ones of these are canon, and, stick with it? No? Okay, alright. But hey, at least those are out of the picture now. So I went into this one with relatively low expectations. I felt like DC's animation hasn't been as special since Brave and the Bold ended, with some minor exceptions. But this movie coming out in 2019 gave me some hope. As a Batman and Ninja Turtles fan, I feel like this movie represents my favorite parts of both. But best of all, it pulls off the delicate balancing act of representing a more beloved mainstream version of these icons, while also knowing just how much to do a little differently. The story follows 4 sewer-dwelling action figure salesmen as they hunt down their nemesis, the Shredalyzer, to the streets of Gotham City, New Jersey. Of course, Gotham's badass vigilante protectors would want to keep the peace on their turf, so the two groups fight because, you know, that's how the fucking crossovers always gotta happen. You gotta have them fight, and then they team up. But then they team up to face off with more ninjas than you can throw a shuriken at. Alright, violence is not a crucial part of Batman or Turtles. It's obvious that both can exist without the blood and gore, and they do that quite often. But you have to admit, it's not something that clashes with either of them if handled well. Seeing this movie go for such a blunt and hard-hitting direction with its action was shocking in the best way. I've always wanted to see more dark and gritty Batman stories with the blue costume. As a kid, I hated this look, but as an adult, I see the charm, and the idea of a more lighthearted Batman being faced with dark subject matter is interesting. Usually when Batman stories take a dark route, they make sure he's dark too to fit with that world. But this one's a more lighthearted take juxtaposed against some pretty gruesome shit. And the TMNT are a franchise that works with a variety of tones. You can do a lighthearted Turtles story just as easily as a dark and gritty one, and both work. That's a story that has reinvention and reiteration built in, so it's hard to truly get them wrong, although it's still possible.
You ain't a ninja?
No, I am Shinobi.
You're a full-fledged mutant hottie.
Do not call me mutant or hottie.
But hey, let's say you didn't get into these characters from the darker takes, and maybe you're a fan of the 80s Turtles or some of the lighter takes on Batman, like Adam West or Brave and the Bold. This one's still got something for you too. I love how the characters are handled in this movie. This is a neutral enough take on the adolescent jujitsu tortoises to feel familiar to fans of any take on them. You can watch this version of them directly after most other interpretations of them and still get a sense that they're the same characters. Their character designs take visual elements from multiple cartoons, the initials on the belt buckles with the 80s show, the expressions and stature of the 2003 cartoon. Donatello looks a bit more like his 2012 series counterpart. But beyond that, they just all have the personality traits that we know and love from these guys. Even Leonardo feels well utilized as the leader and serious one, reining in the antics and ninja skateboarding bullshittery of his 3 brothers. He's the one who feels most comfortable interacting with Batman because they share a lot of common traits, being they're so disciplined and stoic compared to their respective teams. I know I caught a lot of shit in my last Turtles video for saying Leo tends to be the most boring, but I wanted to clarify that I mean when he's not used well. You either really need to double down on him being the serious leader type and taking care of the others, or you can make him more like one of the guys and let him have fun and be a goofball too. I just felt that the 2003 show didn't lean far enough into either category and ended up with a version of him that just felt like he didn't socialize well with the rest of them and mostly just barked orders at them or got angry at life, which I still somewhat relate to. We have a more contemporary version of Shredder as our main villain, alongside a whole cast of Batman villains for him to shake his head at. I hate Gotham. I like how this Shredder is badass enough to beat Batman one-on-one. Granted, he had to kinda cheat to do it and barely made it out of there, but he proved he's no pushover. Though I still think I prefer him as an adorable little spacefaring war criminal. As for Senor Batman and his Batfamilia, I appreciate that they allowed Batgirl and Robin to have a part in this story to even out the ratio of the crossover. Without them, it could have easily felt more like Ninja Turtles movie featuring a bit part by Batman, and I appreciate how well they blend the kind of villains and schemes you'd see in a Turtles story with those of a Batman story. Turtles are always going up against outlandish and conceptually insane foes because that's exactly what they are, while Batman is always about preserving order in his city and making sure Gotham doesn't suffer at the hands of ambitious madmen. We get a healthy dose of both of those things simultaneously by taking those Batman villains and then making them outlandish and conceptually insane. More than they already were. Gassing up all these bad guys with mutagen may turn you off a bit, but they confirm in the movie itself this isn't permanent. So why not enjoy the crazy while it lasts? Oh shit, they got Tom Kenny back as Penguin, that's awesome. And lastly, I appreciate what this movie did with Batman. My least favorite take on Batman is the all-powerful, know-it-all demigod vigilante who can do anything by himself and has all the answers all the time. The version of him where he's finishing everyone's sentences for them because he's so smart and acts like he knows better than everyone. I hate that smug bastard. I like a Batman that's capable of being overwhelmed and has to face odds that worry him a little. I also like a Batman that's sometimes second-guessing himself because he needs a little reassurance from his friends. And most importantly, I like a Batman that has friends. I don't like the antisocial, "my mission must be faced alone, don't help me" Batman. Thankfully, Batman vs. the Bee Gees goes more of the route I personally enjoy for the character, where he's kind of a grouch, but not unreasonable.
This isn't the time for pizza.
He's willing to accept help when he needs it, and he's not constantly distrustful of every person he meets. Seeing him and Leonardo bond and compare notes on martial arts was a lot of fun. And after the Turtles have proven themselves, he drops the hard-ass act and celebrates a victory with them. I think it's impressive that the characters themselves aren't self-serious grimdark takes, but the villains are. That contradiction really sells you on the difference between them, and I feel like that nuance isn't really seen in a lot of these movies. Usually it's a silly villain against silly heroes, or a dark and gritty villain against sepia-toned Punisher-style heroes. This is the first animated superhero movie I've seen in quite a while where I personally felt like the direct target audience. Batman v TMNT Dawn of Decapitations is made for people who grew up with both of these characters, but don't mind seeing those characters and the story mature a little along with them. It has enough love for the classic and more heartfelt visions of them to speak to your inner kid, but also enough of the raw, violent shit to make your adult self cheer at the TV. Watching this with a group of friends was a blast and got a lot of excited reactions. I recommend you find some nerdy, homebound companions, settle down in a Discord call, and have yourself a movie night with the boys. It's been 3 years and a full reboot of the franchise later, with a new theatrically released movie and an accompanying animated series on the way. I think it's safe to say at this point that Rise of the TMNT as a series is officially dead. It's always been kind of a steadfast rule that you don't produce 2 cartoons at the same time about 2 different versions of the same licensed character. Unless, of course, you're Sonic. There won't be another season or another tie-in movie. What we got is what we got. And since I can give this movie a new perspective with the benefit of hindsight, I want to look back at Rise's last hurrah before the big creative reset. This is the Turtles movie that was left behind. It's the 40th anniversary of the Turtles. I've already reviewed every other movie in the franchise except this one, so let's go! I hate when they go to the future and can't figure out a way to make the Turtles look older other than to add hair. God, that's so weird. They should never have hair. Rise of the TMNT, the movie, the game, the series, the visual novel, is about a time-displaced Casey Jones going back to the past to fight the shitty aliens who suck ass with the teenage versions of his mentors. The antagonistic force of this film are the alien race called the Krang, who are actually really scary and threatening this time, as opposed to the previous versions who are ineffectual and generally very silly. This movie serves as a send-off to a great animated series that just never really got a fair chance. But unfortunately, despite loving the show it spawned from, I've realized I don't really care much for this movie. I've always been a big defender of Rise of the TMNT, the series. After it was initially cancelled, I did a review of it to praise it that could act as a sort of rallying call for people to try to push for the show to get more episodes. But its fate was sealed. It had really impressive art direction and appealing character designs, funny comedy, unique world building not seen in any other iteration of the Turtles, and some of the most complex fight choreography in any Western animated show, which probably also contributed to its demise because this show looked expensive. You could practically see Viacom's money burning anytime an action scene started. Gotta love it. I would've watched 3 or 4 more seasons of this easily. Except Nickelodeon sabotaged it by playing it in bizarre time slots or just not at all. The good old spectacular Spider-Man treatment. But even if the series was cut short well before its time, I can't help but wonder why this movie exists. It doesn't really add anything substantial for the characters or conclude anything left hanging. It just hangs awkwardly off the end of it. Like, here's a great show, and then, hey, that's there too. It doesn't serve well as a finale because it's missing a lot of major side characters from the series. No Baron, Draxum, or Cassandra Jones outside of a small cameo. None of the cool magic monster underworld characters or locations, even though those were really big for the show. And nothing to really directly connect the Krang back to Shredder. That part is just all implied with the visuals. Really, the big multi-part finale in the show itself felt like a better conclusion in terms of wrapping up all the story threads and including all the characters. Somehow this movie feels like a DLC expansion that doesn't really add much. If anything, it just kind of highlights the flaws of the series that I didn't think about before. So the main series ended with the Turtles finally fighting the Shredder, unlocking their cool magic powers, and realizing that Leonardo should be in charge. This movie picks up right away with Leo struggling to fit the role of the leader because he doesn't like taking orders or feedback from the other three turtles. So over the course of this adventure, he's battling his own ego to finally be the Leonardo that Casey remembers and looks up to. I guess I overlooked it at the time, but I've discovered in retrospect that Rise is one of the biggest examples of Surf Dracula in recent memory. A lot of TMNT basics take a good long while to appear in this version, like the team getting their proper weapons in the finale, learning Splinter's backstory, fighting the real Shredder, Leo becoming the leader of the team. Even their reinvention of Splinter was a depressed schlub needing to find the motivation to start acting like their proper master. I suppose I was blind to it at the time because I was having so much fun with the rest of the show that these things didn't stand out. Like, the premise is still Ninja Turtles, they're still doing all the same things they ought to be. It's not as bad as the 36 hours of television it took for the Punisher to finally definitely for sure decide he wants to be the Punisher, definitely for sure this time. But now I see that this is still another example of a reboot that relies heavily on previous knowledge of the franchise, so it can build up to those elements you already expected to be there. It's like a prequel, but not actually a prequel. I mean, I guess that's what the title was always alluding to. Even this universe didn't get a proper Casey Jones until the final thing in it. A key element in Rise of the TMNT, the movie, is time travel. Something this franchise doesn't play with too often, barring a few spots in the 2012 cartoon. Casey Jones is Leonardo's protege from the future that comes back to prevent an alien invasion apocalypse scenario. His main goal is to basically prevent his entire life from happening because the world is so screwed where he comes from. And other than an admittedly pretty cool looking mask that he barely wears, there's really nothing this character has in common with any other version of Casey except the name. I miss the himbo Punisher as a hobby guy. I'm getting really tired of every new version of Casey and April being teenagers. It irritates me that the 2012 show came up with that and then it just became the default. So I guess this guy's like future Trunks with a hockey mask. And he's not too bad. I've also noticed that over the last two iterations of the Turtles, Michelangelo's personality seems to be changing. He's less of like the fun, party skater, surfer, stoner dude, and now just like the humble, friendly one. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, it's hard to talk about this movie because the plot is very basic. They just gotta keep this MacGuffin thing away from the bad guys to prevent Judgment Day. Not a lot happens really except running from one action set piece to the next. It's almost like just an overlong random episode of the show in that sense. This could have just been like a 2-part episode in the middle of season 2 or something. I don't know why they decided this would be the movie, because the movie implies that it's like the big most important thing. That's not to say it's totally unenjoyable, there's plenty in here that I like too. The Krang are handled in an interesting way. The movie takes them very seriously and always treats them as a huge threat. They aren't the butt of a joke or shown to be silly or incompetent. This is the first time Krang has been a genuine badass that gets to trash the Turtles in combat. And these designs are really cool. Honestly, I'd kind of like to see this version of Krang hang out with the 2003 version of Shredder. Naturally, the animation is stellar and even manages to outdo the craziest scenes in the series with high-impact, high-velocity fight scenes that are pure spectacle. I know giving them magic powers wasn't a popular choice, but it just looks so cool in action, and it's utilized in really creative ways. A lot of people ask me why I didn't review this when it came out, and I think I was battling with the fact that I didn't enjoy it that much. I really liked the series, and the two showrunners, Ant Ward and Andy Siriano, both even reposted my video and said nice things. So I feel bad bad-mouthing the movie after all that, but it's like, just not that interesting to me. It's It's got the fight scenes going for it, and the characters are all very likable and charming as always. And it's just eye candy out the wazoo, but the story just feels unnecessary and half-baked. It doesn't follow up the series in any meaningful way, it's just yet another adventure that also happened. But now that I look back on it, it feels like the show genuinely closed out in a great way and didn't need anything else thrown on top of it. Maybe they didn't need more episodes. Maybe it ended at like the perfect time. At least they got a proper finale. Most shows canceled that early don't even get that. When the Rise of the TMNT movie was released, I think the prevailing feeling among fans of this version was that if the movie was successful enough, it'd help the show get revived for more seasons. It really seemed like a good sign that Netflix was putting out the movie and maybe they'd continue the series on their platform. But now it's more clear that Netflix is just the place Nickelodeon dumps unwanted movies they don't feel like airing out on TV. It's the new straight-to-DVD bargain bin of entertainment. Well worth like the $30 a month it costs now or whatever. And then there's the matter of Mutant Mayhem. Considering how long the animation pipeline takes for a full feature film, especially one with art direction this complex, Mutant Mayhem was probably well underway when this movie was coming together. These things are planned years in advance. While I really enjoyed Rise of the TMNT, I know that it just wasn't meant to be. The Turtles brand has already moved on to a much more successful and far less divisive new iteration. And I'm okay with that. I love Mutant Mayhem, and the new 2D animated series looks interesting too. As sad as it is that things moved on so quickly, at least TMNT remains strong and ever-present. Losing Rise was painful at the time, but gaining Mutant Mayhem feels like fair trade. We've had dozens of iterations of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles over the decades, ranging from the lighthearted Monster of the Week romp of the 80s and 90s, 2003's gritty, comic-accurate love letter to Eastman and Laird's original run in Mirage Comics, the 2012 series' heavy focus on modernizing the campiness of the classic show, and Rise of the TMNT's spectacularly animated tale of family and finding your place in the world. Let's not also forget the classic quadrilogy that did a little bit of everything, and, the ones with Scab Cop Casey. But no TMNT take thus far has quite perfected that teenage mutant element like 2023's Mutant Mayhem. When this project was initially pitched with a strong focus on that teenage element of the team, I shuddered at the thought of a cringy, wildly out-of-touch take on Zoomer Turtles written by 50-year-olds forcing them to say slang like YOLO swag, hashtag fidget spinner memes 420 blaze it. Like everything you remember teens saying in like 2010 because they always get to these things a decade late.
Well, that was an epic fail.
Typically, the Turtles are either written to sound like surfer skater dudes, an acceptably outdated, paradoxically timeless vernacular, or they're written so neutrally that you start to forget they're teenagers at all and just start to think of them as like short 28-year-olds. But Mutant Mayhem pulled off what it set out to do and portrayed the Turtles as believable, likable, realistic 15-year-olds in every way. The voice cast, consisting of Nicholas Cantu, Micah Abbey, Brady Noon, and Shimon Brown Jr., are all talented, experienced voice actors who also happen to be teenagers. Look at all their previous roles. This casting choice was what got me really excited for the movie, because they didn't cast Tom Holland, Jaden Smith, or some other young, famous dork that clams up behind a microphone instead of being in their element on camera. This cast was chosen because, goddammit, they're good voice actors and they sound the right age, not because they're big names to put on a poster. That was reserved for the rest of the mutants who had 3 lines of dialogue each, but I can live with that. Weirdly, this isn't the first Ninja Turtles thing that John Cena's voice acted in. I also think it was a smart decision to cast these guys as the main 4 so that they could be a regular cast for the upcoming TV series spin-off from this film. I wonder if any of these other ones will follow along with that, like Mondo Gecko is getting recast for that cartoon surely. Paul Rudd is expensive now. My sister is 16 years old and I was born after the DVD player was invented, so I'd like to think I know what people this age talk like. And one of the highlights of the movie is just how naturalistic and fast-paced the dialogue between brothers sounds.
Humans are the demon scum of the earth. Avoid them, don't say hi. They lust to murder that which is different from them. To interact with them is to die.
And hey, I know that's objectively prejudiced, but that's what Dad taught us.
They're always relating their experiences and surroundings to pop culture because that's the way they got to know the world around them. And they throw casual barbs at each other the way I remember joking with my friends in high school. I was the Leonardo. Everyone ganged up on me while I winced off into the distance, fantasizing about murder with a samurai sword. Literally me! And the way they stumble over each other in dialogue and effortlessly crack constant rapid-fire jokes just makes me want to watch the movie over and over again to catch every blink-and-you'll-miss-it quip. Apparently, a lot of the dialogue between the turtles was improvised when they recorded together in the same room, and massive portions of the script were rewritten to fit their banter more organically.
And he'd be like, what did you just say? Riz? Use that in the movie. Explain it to me and then let's use it.
The chemistry really shines through in the performances, and serves as a perfect example of how voice acting is a unique and challenging form of acting in itself, but also how beneficial it can be to let the cast bounce off of each other instead of recording separately. Normally I'm pretty bored by the idea of April O'Neil being a teenager since we've gotten nothing but that for the last decade, and I do miss her being like a big sister to them, but this is the first time that I really genuinely felt like she was the same age as them. I think this is the first time I've loved teenage April because her friendship and interactions with the brothers feels so lifelike. It felt like I was seeing not a normal girl and 4 quirky cartoon monsters, but 5 teenagers hanging out. Just 4 of them happen to be anthropomorphic reptile martial artists. It's not a fresh new take on the character since it borrows so heavily from the previous 2 iterations, but it was executed so well that it feels like a new take. If it was always handled this well, I wouldn't care about teenage April anymore. I do wish they'd stop writing one or more of the turtles having a crush on her. Alright, we've had horny pervert Mikey, strung along hopeless incel Donnie, and a Leo that's destined for the friend zone. Is Raph next on the list? Oh wait, no, we got him covered. Okay, can we be done with that now? No more interspecies awkward failed romance? It's okay to keep it in your fan art and your fanfics. We all have our crack ships, I support that. I think that's fine, but please stop making it canon. Splinter learned ninjutsu via training videos and YouTube tutorials this time, and somehow I hate it less than book I found in a storm drain. I do wish we could bring back Hamato Yoshi's pet rat studying his moves because I thought that was adorable, but I can understand dialing it back because the backstory can get convoluted. The worst version of the origin story is ironically the original Mirage book. Hamato Yoshi was in a love triangle with Oroku Nagi and Tang Shen, and Nagi abused Tang Shen, so Yoshi killed Nagi, but Nagi's brother Oroku Saki vowed revenge and killed Tang Shen and Hamato Yoshi, and then Daredevil's origin happened. Yeah, you can simplify it down. I'm just glad we're not permanently handcuffed to Splinter being Hamato Yoshi transformed into a rat like the 3 of the cartoons and the IDW books. It's a cool take, but I don't want it to be the default origin, and I'm open to changing it around each time. In 6 years, Splinter went from being a parody of Jackie Chan to being played by Jackie Chan. The other thing to love about this movie is the visual style that evokes the sketchy look of a teenager's notebook doodles. Characters have odd proportions, asymmetrical faces, and exaggerated silhouettes. Objects are never 100% perfectly square or round. The world and characters have these scratchy outlines and colors that look like they were done with markers and crayons. The visual style is so beautifully full of imperfections that it takes you into the mind of a kid just learning to draw. And the grimy, ragged world is so detailed in its messiness that it becomes immensely appealing to look at. I could stare at any random frame of this movie and see something new every time I look at it. It's the same 3D accentuated with 2D style as Spider-Verse taken in a new direction that avoids being derivative and instead looks wholly original. Somehow the characters look like claymation when they're having these relaxed dialogue scenes with shaky camera movements and spare editing, but the action scenes become highly energetic and dynamic spectacle with smooth motions and complex choreography. I don't think it quite lived up to the action scenes from Rise of the TMNT, but it didn't disappoint me either, and the upcoming series, and hopefully sequel, can still get us closer to that goalpost. All of this action was of course greatly improved by the music. I never thought we'd get a Ninja Turtles movie scored by 9 Inch Nails, but it works so well. I hope Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross come back for the series and the sequel, since they've worked together before on other series like Watchmen. Time will have to tell. Also, these song titles are hilarious. I found the story to be like a better thematic execution of TMNT Out of the Shadows, the movie, not the game, where the Green Teen Team are desperate to fit into the human world and be accepted despite
this whole situation.
Except instead of some half-baked plot about becoming human, they decide the best path to acceptance is to be seen as heroes after clearing New York of crime from a mysterious boss pulling off technology heists. It's cool to see them fully embrace their superhero side instead of doing that kind of consequently during more personal matters. This time they're out there looking for fights instead of it coming to them, and I appreciate how active they are as protagonists because of it. Usually they're reluctant heroes. The story plays things relatively straight and safe, but I had so much fun with it that I was fine with it being on the conventional side. The 2007 movie tried to get more complicated and ended up being riddled with plot holes. I hope we can get back to that level of ambition with a more solid execution in the sequel to this. Take big swings! Work for Spider-Verse. Superfly, the movie's main villain, is simultaneously a brand new character and a bit of a send-up of Stockman Fly from the 80s series. And I was surprised at how Ice Cube managed to really shine in this role with a range of charisma that makes you understand why these mutants see him as a leader, and a grim ferociousness that kept him threatening enough you'd also understand why they fall in line with his dastardly plans. I love this villain, and I wouldn't mind him showing up again in future TMNT projects as another alternative to the usual Shredder or Krang/Utroms shenanigans. TMNT has a lot of good villains. I haven't heard great things about Preacher, but otherwise, Seth Rogen is 3 for 4 on producing cool comic book adaptations. This one needs to be identical to the comic. This one needs to be nothing like the comic. And this one can be sort of the Superbad of superhero movies. A teen comedy where the characters feel like real teenagers and the coming of age feels more earned for it. The ending is also a completely unique direction for the TMNT that hasn't really been attempted before. Attempted well, and it makes me even more excited for the future of this version of the story since we're completely in uncharted territory for these characters. Imagine what that TV show is going to be like. It's going to be nothing like any of the other ones. I wish Rise of the TMNT had taken off and gotten the love it deserved, but this movie is a perfect consolation by bringing in even more fresh ideas and a creative vision for the franchise unlike all the previous ones. Is it the best Turtles movie? I don't know, I'd have to watch it a few more times, but it's definitely the best animated one. I always get mad at YouTube for not putting my videos in the subscription box because people will comment, "Finally, Xavier uploads again after all these years," not knowing 3 other videos came out within the last month already. So maybe that stupid bell icon thing will help you remember I exist. If you want other ways to support the channel, you can always go hit up that Patreon for early videos and exclusive stuff because it's just $1. I'm not kidding, it's only $1. Isn't that cool? If everyone who watched this video donated $1 a month, I'd be able to afford a house for myself, so that would be really cool. You can also check out our merch on TeePublic, or just buy some of my random stuff on eBay. I have a pretty substantial collection of old toys that are still in the box in perfect condition, so go take a look in case you find something you like. And lastly, since this is a YouTube video and you probably play Fortnite, drop my creator code XavierGM next time you buy a silly dance or a cool character skin. Really helps me out. See you next time.